Okay, here. Welcome everyone. Let me take a look here. So let me explain what's going on right now, everybody. I'm going to be having a discussion slash debate with a Muslim who wants to argue that it is moral. Let me see what this is here. Okay, that's not the right person. He wants to argue that stupid lights. He wants to argue that is it moral to how did he word it? Consummate a marriage when a girl reaches puberty. So we're going to be having a discussion on that. His goes by Deenresponds. If anyone knows of who that is, and for some reason all my lights just died, so figure out what's going on with that. Whatever, it's not that big of a deal. So let's see if he has not come in yet. So when he comes in, we will get started on that. And so as soon as he's in, we will start talking about that and go from there. So that's what's going on today, if anyone's interested. I'm going to start by asking him to clarify his position on these issues, because I think that's important. Why did these things just die? Well, I probably need to get new lights. These are crappy lights anyway. So whenever he requests to join, I will let him in. Let's see here. So there should be let me see. Can everyone hear me all right? Say in the chat if you can hear me just fine.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So everything's clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
So can you
Yeah.
clarify, remind me again what you wanted to title this?
Yeah, sure. So it would just be, is consummation after the age of puberty moral? Um, Obviously, I'm gonna be making a distinction between consummation done after the modern age compared to the pre-modern age,
Hmm.
because I believe that girls are not psychosocially mature or equipped to consent actually nowadays for other adulthood responsibilities. But other than that, physically, I don't see it as a detrimental factor on why I wouldn't permit such young marriages today.
Okay. So when you say reaching puberty, okay, we need to clarify, okay, because puberty starts earlier before even the girls reach the age of menarche.
Yeah.
So do you think? So what is your opinion on that? Do they need to reach the age of menarche, or do you take like Daniel Akikachu's view that as long as there are just signs of puberty, marriage
Yeah.
can be
So
consummated?
no Muslim can really hold to the view that menstruation is the be all or end all. This is because of Quran 65:4. It makes mention of those who haven't menstruated yet and have consummated, and then the classical exegetes, they make mention of this girl has not menstruated in this exceptional case where she can consummate due to young age. So yeah, there's like no disagreement on that. So yeah, the menstruation is not the be all or end all, but you would assume that they'll be close to menstruating at that stage with pubescent features in order to consummate.
Well, menstruation happens in Tanner stage 4.
Yep,
So there's 5 Tanner stages. And
agree,
so
agree.
you're arguing you could consummate a marriage with a girl in Tanner stage 1?
No, no. So, as I said, they have to have pubescent features and be approaching the stage of menarche, where they would have these pubescent features in order to actually endure the relations. I don't believe that a girl, after she reaches the age of menarche, let's say if a girl is 12 years old and she reaches the age of menarche at 12 days, sorry, 12 years and 1 day old, when she's 12 years and 0 days old, I don't see there's a major difference between her bleeding and not bleeding to the point where she can and can't consummate. So, that's my position.
Okay, so I'm still trying to grasp. How would you determine when a girl is ready? What would be your objective way to determine
So like pubescent features as well as being able to consummate with minimal harm.
minimal harm?
Hmm.
Okay. How would you know? You mentioned in messages she also has to be mentally ready. How would you determine that?
Yes. So just whenever she's seen to be psychosocially equipped to actually conduct adulthood responsibilities. Now, I disagree. I mean, yeah, my criteria is not going to be some frontal lobe development. I don't believe that's a good criteria. It's
Why
just going to
not?
be whenever. I mean, we can talk about that during the discussion, but right now it's like I'm giving my position, right? So yeah, my position isn't anything of frontal lobe development. Rather, it's whether she's perceived to be able to uphold adulthood responsibilities within the respective societies, and if she's able to uphold them with, there being no evidence that there's a problem here with her functioning as an adult, then I find no problem in her conducting adulthood responsibilities, including giving consent for consummation.
So you don't think lobe development is important for this?
It's not definitive at all. Of course, like there's major frontal lobe development like during puberty,
Well, I'm not thinking of
but
frontal lobes. I'm thinking of the temporal lobes.
yeah, even that. Anything that has to do with neuroscientific findings on this topic, very yeah, I don't find it definitive at all, and they say themselves that it's not a good way to determine when maturity is, and I see it's very arbitrary to say, okay, frontal lobe or whatever a part of the brain you want to actually examine, these parts of the brain don't fully develop until sometimes into the age 30. So I don't see why we're arbitrarily going to pick 18 as the be all and end all where a girl is mentally ready to give consent. I think it's more complicated than that.
Well, there's a reason I brought up the temporal lobes. The temporal lobes control sexual behavior, and they are mostly developed between basically 14 and a half and 17. And I have various studies here. So, for example, there's a study called Development Trajectories of the Frontal Temporal Lobes from Infancy to Early Adulthood in Healthy Individual Adults. They say that they basically fill out in size between 9 and 12, but they don't reach peak like networking and gray matter until 14.9. I have another one here. It says the age 16, it's age-related changes in frontal and temporal lobe volumes in men. Now they say men for 16. So, but women are going to be close. And so the other one
Okay.
says 14.9, so it's close. I have other one here that says the age of 17. So I would say that's going to be important, especially for controlling sexual development. Now, when we take that type of neuroscientific research and we compare it with research done on CSA, so child abuse,
Hmm.
uh, we find similar issues. So when we do those type of studies, so various meta-analyses have shown this, we see that when children are engaged in that type of activity, they develop more psychiatric issues, more higher levels of depression, higher levels of stress, more mental disorders. So we have a convergence of two different things: the neuroscientific research as well as the sociological and psychological research, all pointing to this idea that when you children prior to basically completing around the age when they're completing puberty and the temporal lobes are being developed, uh, it's not good. It's like biting into a fruit that's not ripe. These children do not know what they're experiencing. They don't know what's going on, and engaging in any type of activity uh, will mess them up, and it doesn't result in good behaviors. So from science, we can see it's far better to wait until after puberty is complete, not just when they have reached some of the stages of puberty.
Sure. So yeah, my standard isn't what
Oh,
science
one
says
more
is the
thing, real
most.
quick.
Yeah.
Let me just say the study. I said it was 17. It's image brain development, the adolescent brain, and they say 17 for the temporal lobe. So go ahead.
Okay, sure. I can't pull up the study now to examine it, but I'm just gonna take like your word for it. Uh, so like, yeah, again, my source of morality doesn't come from some scientific study that tells me when a girl's development stages in the brain happen or what's most optimal. My standard comes from the Quran and Sunnah. It comes from the tradition I have through the Quran and the Ahadith. And yeah, as like the discussion goes on, I'm going to be bringing standards from early Christians, early Jews, early Muslims, unanimously agreeing that they see no issue in this sort of conduct. I don't think some scientists in the modern age have come across some modern phenomena where, okay, now we know there's some harm to these effects that no one prior to us has ever like come across. I don't believe that's the case. So my standard of morality doesn't come from some scientific findings or some inference you can make from scientific findings in correlation to some depression or some negative causes that happen through young marriages. I could just put that to other causes as well. I don't think there's any like definitive case to be made here. If there is, then there's not just a problem for myself, but also the Christian and Jewish and pretty much any pre-modern religions traditions.
So Christianity constantly talks about things called the. So Catholics will say the two books, the book of Scripture and the book of nature. Protestants will say nature is the 67th book of Scripture. It's a very long-standing Christian tradition. that we are supposed to study nature to better understand ethics. And so we see this in scripture, like test everything, come, let us reason together. We don't just get our ethics from divine command. Thomas Aquinas, who you've cited, was actually in the natural law theory. So we're discovering what is the optimal way for human flourishing. And the way we do that is to study nature, study how humans develop to better understand. So if you're going to cite Christians, I'm going to appeal to the two books of God, the book of nature and the book of scripture. Nature helps us to interpret scripture. Scripture helps us understand nature. So Christians are called to learn from nature to better understand how human flourishing should be achieved. We're not just supposed to take arbitrary commands from the past and not apply them to modern standards, as well as our advances in science.
Sure. So I just got a quick syllogism here for you just on this topic. So
Okay.
we can talk about first Jesus' lack of condemnation of said practices. Obviously, presumably, you would think that Jesus, as God, man, at the same time, he still has the knowledge accessible to him to know that these practices are wrong, right? So there's no appeal to he didn't have any access to this natural law not being optimal, and we've only now figured it out now. Jesus would have that knowledge, right? So premise one, Jesus followed some oral traditions evidenced by him celebrating Hanukkah in John 10, a practice that isn't written in the Old Testament. Do you agree?
Uh, Depends on Old Testament. Are you taking the Catholic one? Because it would be in Maccabees.
I mean, you don't really let your, as I know, like you don't let your denomination be known.
Yeah.
So it's going to be like a
Well,
holistic view. I mean, I'm not going to
I'll
attack you as a
just grant you
Catholic.
that. I'll grant you that.
Uh,
Yeah, he's
okay,
basically let me help you with a word. He's celebrating in a holiday that was not directly commanded by God
sure,
because it's not in the Torah, for example. Purim, for example, is in the book of Esther, but it's not commanded by God, even though the Jews celebrate it.
sure. So he does celebrate it, but maybe you would dispute whether it comes from God or not. That's fine. But he does celebrate it. He does celebrate some oral practices the Pharisees would be conducting. Sure. So premise two, Jesus disapproved of certain oral practices of the Jews at his time, being the Pharisees, shown in Matthew 15, where he explains how the Pharisees should stop washing their hands as an obligatory ritual prior to eating. You agree with that, correct?
Yeah, he condemned the traditions of the Pharisees. Yes.
Sure. Premise three, the Pharisees' oral tradition almost certainly maintained a tradition of girls being able to marry at the onset of puberty, which can be found in the earliest Jewish commentaries for Ezekiel 16.
Okay, keep going.
You agree?
No, but keep going. So finish your syllogism.
Okay. I mean, we're gonna have to stop there, so because it can't go on. Like,
Okay. Well,
if you dispute it,
so the
go on.
reason I'm disputing it is because a lot of that's so prior to 70 AD, there were various different schools. I mean, you have Pharisees of Galilee, you have Pharisees of Judea, you have different classes of these different groups. All of that sort of like blended together after 70 AD when the Jews lost the temple and they had to start working more together. Prior to that, there was a lot of different things. So you have like the Essenes, for example, are disputing with the Pharisees, disputing with the Sadducees. Even Pharisee groups are not entirely always in agreement with each other. And a lot of what we have regarding the oral law is going to come after 70 AD in like places like the Mishnah. It's hard to really determine
Sure,
how far it goes back in terms of those types of things, or
sure.
which group it would have been confronted with.
Okay. Do you have any evidence that contradicts that the minimum age of marriage was at the onset of puberty in these early times?
Yes, the research, as I said, by Amram Trooper and Michael Satlow show that in Palestine specifically, they're marrying between earliest is like mid-teens would be on average. So the general custom Jesus would have been seeing around then is not 12-year-olds getting married left and right. The general custom he would have been mostly aware of is girls marrying after 16, that kind of thing.
Sure, but would he be aware of a tradition that most likely would allow for young marriages that you would condemn, such as 11, 10, sorry, 11, 12, 13, 14, these sort of ages? He would be exposed to that.
He was.
More than likely so.
So you're asking if he would be aware of these types of practices going on in Judea?
These practices being taught by the Pharisees as an oral law, as explained as for the exegesis of Ezekiel 16.
We don't know. It didn't come up in terms of what he would condemn. Now he would have been aware, in the sense, in the Christian tradition, he is God, but he didn't act. It was never actually brought to him as something to discuss.
Okay, sure. So, but he would be aware of these practices.
Possibly,
being
if they were going
be,
on.
being 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 taught, not even if the practice wasn't happening, it's still a teaching that we have mentioned in the earliest. Okay, one second. I want to address what you said before. So you citing the average age of marriage being 18 to 20, 16 to 20. Okay, I grant that. That's not my
Okay.
claim. My claim is the minimum acceptable age being taught by these pre-modern societies was the onset of puberty. And to support my claim, we have Origin of Alexandria, right? Someone that you guys do take from a lot, that did progress a lot, like in terms of how to articulate the Trinity. Origin of Alexandria commentates on Ezekiel 16 in the same manner as these Jews. He says that the onset of puberty is what's being discussed here in Ezekiel 16:8. So we have conformity from early church members. We have conformity between the Mishnah. You're not giving me any evidence to work with that contradicts what I'm positing.
Okay, then finish what you're trying to posit so we can discuss it.
Okay. So premise 4, if getting married at the onset of puberty led to great harm to the extent where, sorry, one second, where it is a prohibited action, you would very much expect Jesus to condemn it, just as he condemned the oral practice that was introduced through human traditions of ritual washing before eating. Would you expect that?
Not necessarily, no. There's a lot of horrible practices going on in Jesus' day. He didn't have time to talk about because that's not what he was mainly focusing on. So, for example,
Can
we
you give me an
know, for example, that
example analogous to this?
absolutely. So the Greeks had moved in throughout the region of Palestine. Uh, Basically, the Decapolis, for example, Tiberias, for example, on the lake, on the sea or Lake of Galilee. We know that the Greeks and the Romans liked to use boys. That was a very common practice in
Yeah,
that day, especially throughout
yeah,
the Roman
yeah.
Empire.
Wait, sorry. Just to cut you off. I'm aware of that. I forget the Greek term, but it's translated to corrupting boys, if I'm not mistaken, right? So they were talking about that, and the early church did condemn that as a practice.
The early
Um,
church condemned it. You're
yes,
talking about Jesus, though.
yeah, even Jesus, even Jesus did not condemn it. That's correct. But the reason why I'm going to posit as to why he did not condemn it and why it's not analogous is because uh, the immediate audience, when Jesus is condemning such things in oral practices, has to have some basis within the Mishnah or the oral tradition that we know of today, right? Now, the oral tradition of the Jews didn't posit this corrupting boys practice that you're citing. This is from the Greeks. This isn't from the
Hmm.
Jews. This isn't from the Pharisees. So I would say this is an analogous. Can you give another example?
No, no, no. You're talking about why didn't Jesus condemn all these practices going around in the world around him of that time? Now, he
No,
engaged
no,
with
no, no,
Greeks and
no, no,
Jews.
not around the world. That'll be a straw man. I'm saying specifically the practices that he was exposed to that the Pharisees were teaching as oral law.
You're assuming they were teaching this like frequently, like this was just a common thing. It was
It doesn't
probably
matter
more
about frequency. Oh,
yes,
sorry,
it
go ahead.
does because you're just saying, well, Jesus didn't actually condemn child marriage or like marrying at 12. That's not really what the point of Christian ethics is. He's not going to give us an exhaustive list of every do and don't. Christianity, Jesus and Paul are laying down a system of virtue ethics. So if you read, for example, the Nicomachean Ethics from Aristotle, he doesn't list a lot of actions to perform, even though he's doing an ethical treatise, because that's not how ancient forms of ethics really work. You could list some actions, but that wasn't the aim. The aim is to basically teach imitation, lay down the virtues, this kind of stuff. So when you basically do that, right action will follow. It's not his aim at that point to literally give an exhaustive list of everything wrong the Pharisees are
Sure.
doing or everything wrong the Greeks are doing. So there's a
Yeah.
problem right then and there in terms of our assumptions.
Okay. I understand your position. This is a very modern approach to these sort of topics. This isn't like something that you would find within the early church then actually teaching in regards to this topic. Actually, the early church would know of a lot of harmful effects. As I'm going to get to my second argument, this is still my first one. They would have been aware of these harmful effects of children to even a greater extent because they didn't have any access to medical facilities. The infant mortality rate would be a lot higher than today. The maternal mortality rate would be a lot higher than today. The complications, such as the fistulas that you bring up, obstetrical fistulas, would also be a lot higher than today because of no medical facilities accessible to them back then, right? So they would be aware of all these major complications. And even if I grant your assumption that we had some virtue ethics that they used as a broad principle that they would apply, they would be the first people to condemn based upon this principle you've posited, based on the harmful effects they would see coming about from child marriages, and yet they still don't condemn it. The early church still don't. So who are you to condemn it today based upon the findings you find from obstetrical fistulas and the rates of maternal mortality rates? Who are you to make that decision then based on virtue ethics that it's more harmful, even though they were exposed to even more harm back then?
Okay, so two things. First of all, Brent Shawn his book, or I'm not sorry, his paper, The Age of Roman Girls at Marriage and Some Considerations. No, Christians were actually marrying later than the average pagan Roman was. So they were already experiencing practices around that time where they were not actually marrying around the same time as the Romans were. So for them in their culture, they were already expecting girls to wait longer. And again, if the average age girls were marrying in this time is still late teens, they're not seeing it as frequently. They'd already determined as culture, hey guys, based on stuff like what Cyrannus of Ephesus says, that young girls should not be bearing children because they're just simply not ready. They can't actually get the child out of them for various reasons. So you're assuming, like, for example, that there was this widespread use of it going around, and that's just not necessarily the case. Second of all, I go back to the book of scripture and the book of nature. The more we learn about this, the more it's likely we can say, yes, this is extremely harmful and we should condemn it. And early church fathers would agree with that kind of stuff about studying nature to determine what is likely, to determine how we should understand what is going to be the most optimal way of human flourishing. So of course I can condemn it based on what scientific research has shown. That's a Christian tradition. There's a reason modern science comes out of Christian Europe, as scholars like Toby Huff or Edward Grant have noted. It's because Christians were very much interested in studying nature to determine what right actions were to take, to determine the laws God has imputed in the universe, this kind of thing. So of course I can condemn it based on what the research has. Now, in terms of what happens in the past, I could just simply apply the idea of presentism. They didn't know, for example, but that doesn't mean they're making a moral action at that point because, again, they had lacked the information to be able to determine the moral status of the
I don't agree with
situation.
that. I
Why?
don't agree with that. Okay, so I'm gonna just everything that you said, but I also want to get to the end of my syllogism after this, if you don't mind. So, yeah, if we can talk about your first point, which is I mean, you're having your cake and you're having your cake and you're eating it at the same time, because you're telling me, whatever his name is, Cyrannus of Ephesus, I believe, he gives a descriptive account of these harmful effects and how, people that are young have these complications from childbirth. So they're aware of the complications. Like, we're not like coming across anything in the modern age that they didn't know of. If you're going to maintain that position, then be consistent and know that the early church did know of the harmful effects, and based upon the harm principle that they had to apply to certain marriages, as I would assume they would like condemn certain marriages that would cause intense harm, such as getting married too old. Having relations with someone that's too old is going to cause intense harm. So the early church would condemn such a thing, right? They
This
would
is
condemn also.
this
Yeah,
is
wait.
this is
If,
just an
if you could,
argument from
if you
science.
could, if
Go
you,
ahead.
I know it's an argument. Wait, yeah, that's an argument from silence, but it's an arguments from silence aren't inherently fallacious. If you
Mhm.
expect it to be evidence, then it's not fallacious, right? You agree. Now, I'm making a case that you would expect it to be evidence. So allow me to finish. Now, when we're talking about the early church and Cyrannus of Ephesus or other like early people that you mentioned, I remember that you did mention during your responses, you're having your cake and you're eating, as I said, because you're saying these people knew of these harmful effects, but at the same breath, you're saying that they didn't condemn it due to them being ignorant of the harmful effects. That's being inconsistent. Now, the second
Well,
thing you
no,
mentioned,
no, 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 no.
I
That's
mean,
not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
I allowed you. You're just gonna have to let me finish
All
because
right.
I let you finish, and I want to reply to all your points, right? So, yeah, uh, sorry, I'm just trying to remember what you said now. So, I mean, we can get into the rest of the syllogism, I guess, because I pretty much did address like what you were
Okay.
saying
Can I
there. And
clarify
and and
something though?
and and just before you do, I also wanted to address the proliferation. You were saying, oh, it wasn't as common, therefore you wouldn't expect a condemnation. Now, my argument doesn't rest upon that. Homosexuality wouldn't be as common as these young marriages, and despite that, we still see condemnation, clear-cut condemnation from the early church and from Jesus, or maybe not Jesus himself, probably Paul, mentioning that this is immoral. Now, you would assume that these young marriages are more common than homosexual practices. So I still have a case to be made here that you would expect a condemnation. I'm gonna let you to respond now, but I want to get to the rest of my syllogism after your clarification.
Okay. Clarify. I'm not saying that, hey, they were aware of these things, but they were also ignorant. I'm saying certain people like Tertullian, who is a legal or a theologian, legal scholar or theologian, he's not writing about these kinds of stuff. He's mainly focusing on uh, Trinitarian aspects or dealing with heresies. He mentions it sort of like in brief passing kind of thing. Okay, he's not going to be a medical expert. So, and again, so his main focus is not even going to be on these kinds of things because he's more interested in dealing with heretics at his time. So it's like wondering why, for example, like Richard Nixon, or I'm sorry, Richard Dawkins didn't mention Herbert Hoover, the president from like the 1920s and 30s. Well, it's just not a topic he's focusing on. It's a similar kind of thing when it comes to Tertullian. Now, you're true, he does mention something in passing about veiling around the age of 12, but again, he's not going to be an expert on this. We got to go to what someone like Cyrannus of Ephesus. It'd be like me citing Macrobius. Macrobius says monarchy did not happen until the age of 14, but he was a philosopher. Should I use him?
Sure. So, if you're making an isolated case with Tertullian, you have a point, I guess, kind of. But with a holistic view of my argument, I'm not resting my case on Tertullian. We got Origen, Tertullian, Aquinas, canon law in the Catholic Church setting it at 12 years old, with exceptions being made if they reach monarchy earlier. I'm giving you these holistic cases. Are you gonna say all these people were ignorant? That they did like none of these people have access to what Cyrannus of Ephesus had said? Is he
So,
like just one isolated guy in history that had access to this information? I'm sure these guys knew, the early church knew for for 1,700 or 1,800 years, they knew of these harmful effects and yet never condemned it on based on the principle of harm. So it's getting a kind of repetitive now. So maybe I could just finish
so
my
I want
sentence,
to, I have,
and then we can get to another
well, I have a
point.
question. So with canon law, it says marriage, right? It says minimum is marriage, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so like if you read Kim Phillips' book Medieval Maidens, they arrange marriages early, but often they put in stipulations saying you can't consummate until they're in their late teens for obvious reasons.
Were you allowed to consummate at 12?
Not necessarily because of the problems that will result that Albertus Magnus Gallus of Rome would talk about. So canon law just seems to be like, hey, this is like the bare minimum, but people of the actual time knew consummation should not actually be happening at that age. That's why they didn't actually assume that was the case.
12 wasn't the bare minimum. I can They make exceptions to this, just as Aquinas did. Aquinas had canon law in his day. He didn't contradict canon law. And in Aquinas' Summa, he says a girl is ready at 12, a boy is ready at 14, and a girl can be ready before 12 even if she meets the requirements. So that's not true.
Okay, well, quite frankly, he's just simply wrong. That's why I go to medical experts of his day to
You're
show
throwing them,
this.
you're throwing them all under the bus. Like this is clear.
Yeah,
Like this
what's
is
wrong with
this.
that? They
Okay,
can be
okay,
wrong. They're not infallible.
okay, but listen, they're not completely ignorant of the harmful effects that this causes. They're not. Like, what do you think these guys are doing? Like they have no knowledge at all of what pregnancies are going around in their life. They know that younger girls have more harmful or they have more disadvantages when they're given pregnancy, just as they would know that older pregnancies would have more harmful effects. Surely they would know that. Like what you're positing, just I wouldn't expect it. I would expect what I'm positing, to be
Look,
fair. So
not necessarily. Like for example, I respond to
I'm
people
not, I'm
all
not
the
saying
time.
necessarily. I'm not saying necessarily. I'm making an inductive case on a probabilistic framework that you would expect what I'm saying more than you.
Okay, well, I will respond to that by saying there's a lot of like, for example, legal experts today who are whizzes at like legal issues, and yet their understanding of like medieval history is crap. Like I just had to respond to a guy who knows all about economic history, but he thinks like the Dark Ages was a thing. He thinks like that, like the church was like persecuting scientists, and I had to show no, this is just simply wrong. Thomas Aquinas is not a medical expert. Often we can see in today's day and world people that are like experts in like their niche make really bad assumptions about stuff in other niches. So Thomas Aquinas is not the guy to go
Would
to on this.
would the church at the time of Aquinas have medical knowledge, at least to a basic extent, to know that young marriages causes harm? Would the church at this time know this?
Would the church or Aquinas? Who are you talking about?
Church, Bert, I'm not making. Listen, you keep strawmanning. I'm not making the case that Aquinas himself or Tertullian himself in these isolated cases are my evidence. They're making claims. They're making claims based upon uh, norms at their times and beliefs at their times that were commonplace. So the early church at their times, at Aquinas' time, at Tertullian's time, at Origen's time, they would already have knowledge of older pregnancies or younger pregnancies having these higher harmful effects. And they were just positing what the general knowledge was at the time. They weren't saying anything that contradicted what there was common belief in their societies. And common belief in their societies would include basic medical knowledge that younger
It's
pregnancies
false.
causes more harm. I
It
mean,
is false. That's
I mean, if you're gonna say, sorry, just give me a minute. Sorry.
John, are you there?
Oh, no,
Oh, it looks like
sorry.
he's.
Yeah,
Are you there?
just give me about a minute. Yeah,
Oh,
just give me about a minute. Sorry.
okay. All right. Let me just look at the comments here while he's got to take care of something, so I'll allow him to finish that when he comes back. Um, it's a very strange argument. It has nothing to do with the point that's being made here. Let's see who's in the chat here right now. Okay, this chat when this self condemns it. Yeah, I know the Catholic Church does condemn it. I mean, IP is a Mormon. Yeah, right. Not a Mormon, but unrelated. But will you get a house tour? No, you're not getting a house tour. What on earth are you even asking?
Yeah, sorry.
Never. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was responding to comments.
Now
Go
you're
on,
good.
continue.
No, you're good. Yeah, so, um, yeah, sorry. I just had to because I got my like notes here in front of me on my PC, and for some reason the internet disconnected. But yeah, so, um, yeah, if you just allow me to continue my syllogism, because right now we're just at a disagreement. Like, I'm positing that the early church they would
Okay,
have this basic knowledge that. Yeah,
finish
go
your
ahead. Go ahead.
syllogism, and then I want to respond to a bunch of what you said.
Okay, so we got. So I'll just repeat the premise I said just before, which is if getting married at the onset of puberty led to great harm to the extent where it should be prohibited, or it should be a prohibited action, you would very much expect Jesus to condemn it, just as he condemned the oral human traditions of ritual washing before eating. Premise 5. Jesus did not condemn such a practice in the Bible or in the form of an oral tradition transmitted to the apostles in the early church, who had the best idea of what Jesus' morals were. On the contrary, they allowed such marriages, examples being Origen, Tertullian, Aquinas, and the majority of canon law in the Catholic Church. Conclusion 1. Uh, Sorry, one second. Conclusion 1. If the level of harm for early or late pregnancies is high enough for prohibition, then one must expect. Um, Sorry, no, that's the wrong one. My bad. Yeah, there we go. So Jesus almost certainly. So this is the first conclusion from the first syllogism. Jesus almost certainly did not believe marriages at the onset of puberty is immoral, and therefore Christians should find no problem with marriages like these occurring in pre-modern times. Go ahead.
Okay, a lot of philosophical issues there. Let me back up a little bit though. So it wasn't the common practice in the medieval period, and Thomas Aquinas was a monk. He's not going to be an expert on this stuff. He's focusing on philosophy, these kinds of things. So again, the medical experts of the day, as I already mentioned, said that it should be delayed until late teens, like 16 or 18. Okay, and again, the idea it's a common practice is just simply false. I have so many sources here saying that throughout the Middle Ages or the medieval period, they're marrying around 20. I mean, I got a bunch. I've cited them in so many other videos in the past. That's just as it was. Your argument is an argument from silence. Okay, we know there's many things Jesus did not condemn that Christians later had problems with. That doesn't at all mean that this would be a problem. Because again, you're assuming this was like a in your face kind of thing. They came to Jesus with various customs or traditions of the Pharisees and said, "What about this? What about that?" Just because they never got to that one doesn't mean that he would have had a problem with it. This is assuming way too much from very limited data here. And that's just simply not how ethics works. You just can't build your entire case on an argument from silence. Because we could say the same thing about so many other practices, like, like female circumcision, which is a practice that did happen quite often in the ancient world, or,
Did
using
the
boys
Pharisees teach
for,
it?
horrible things. What was that?
Did the Pharisees teach these practices that you're citing as examples?
No, but he engaged with Greeks for the similar reasons. John the Baptist, for example, condemned Herodias, the
So,
marriage with Herod
sorry, you lagged
Antipas and
out.
Herodias, for example.
Yeah, sorry,
So
you,
they were aware of certain practices and they
yeah, sorry,
condemned them when they saw them.
yeah, sorry, you lagged out for a second. Just repeat that point.
So, for example, John the Baptist condemns the marriage with Herod Antipas and Herodias,
Yep,
marrying your brother's wife kind of thing. So
yep.
when these things came up, I could just simply appeal to the fact this wasn't coming up in Jesus' day because most of them were getting married in late teens to early 20s. So there wasn't this rampant problem of 12-year-olds marrying and having children and then dying from having, not a birth canal fully developed kind of issue. So this is just appealing to just an idea that just simply wasn't rampant in Jesus' day or in his area.
Okay. Um, just to clarify, like nowhere in my syllogism did I actually mention it being commonplace. So that's a straw man yet again. Like
Okay,
you should try to listen more
I
to what
know
the syllogism
you
says.
didn't. I know you didn't say it. I'm responding by pointing out that it wasn't common, therefore it didn't come up. Therefore, we have a reason as to why we have silence on this from Jesus. So I know you didn't mention common. I didn't strawman you. That was my counter argument. Don't strawman me.
Yeah. So it being commonplace or not being commonplace has nothing to do with the matter that it did take place in the form of a teaching that the Pharisees were giving, right? Now, within the oral practices of the Pharisees, it more than likely was the case. If it more than likely was the case that they allowed it marriages so young, then you would expect Jesus to condemn such a human or oral tradition. Now, I'm going to posit other evidences, like, for example, I know you didn't take the Proto-Evangelion of James, but despite that, it still serves a purpose of giving us a historical idea of what was the minimum acceptable age. Now, whether you want to take that Mary was 12 or not, the fact of the matter is Jesus is exposed to young marriages based on this historical evidence. Girls were getting married at the ages of 12 and 13, marriages that you see as being having harmful effects, and we have so much historical data on this that shows that this was acceptable, this was occurring, despite it not being common. Another point would just be that we do see, despite other things not being common, condemnations like homosexuality. If you have at homosexuality, I would assume you would say that younger marriages were happening at a more frequent rate than um, than actual homosexual relations, right? Now,
Probably
it makes
not.
it makes come on, like come on, okay, but it's fine. Like you can hold to that view. I'm gonna
Not in the
disagree, but
Greco-Roman world. I mean, homosexuality was just the thing. I mean, going through, Greece, like if you go to Corinth, for example, that was just the thing. But again, if you've already acknowledged that the average age they were marrying is late teens, early 20s, no, homosexuality would have been far more common in that day and age than like marrying at 12.
yeah, I disagree. And another point would be that there needs to be clarification on this due to the fact that the Jews are interpreting the Old Testament as allowing for a minimum age of marriage at such young ages. This would even take, like, it would give more credence to my view that you would expect there to be some condemnation based upon the misinterpretation or ambiguity being presented by the Old Testament, which are causing the Jews to interpret it in a manner that is causing all of these minor marriages to occur. So that would give more credence that you would expect it to be evidence, you would expect it to be condemnation from Jesus, right? It's like someone interpreting the Old Testament for thousands of years that homosexuality is allowed, and Jesus comes about and is clarifying all the mistakes and all the issues of the Jews, and yet he chooses to ignore that pressing matter that homosexuality isn't actually allowed, and they are misinterpreting the scripture. They're adding human traditions. So, yeah, I mean, there's my argument. You disagree, and you gave your reasons why, but I don't want to dwell too much on one specific argument. I want to get to all the details from your responses, and yeah, so I
Okay,
think we
but
can end it
we
there.
need to actually talk about something very important here. Okay, a lot of people in the ancient world were messed up. That's just going to be a fact because again, the Romans and the Greeks just used children for all sorts of horrible things, especially sexual things. So a lot of people were suffering from mental issues. Poor nutrition is going to also result in poor mental issues. So a lot of the times, people of the ancient world just simply were not well off like we are today. That doesn't mean that if these rare early merges were occurring, they were not resulting in harmful effects. And again, the systematic reviews, narrative reviews today show child marriage leads to extreme harm, like higher rates of psychiatric disorders, depression, higher levels of stress. Okay, this is just a fact of nature. Brains are basically the same as they were 2,000 years ago. And if you put a child in a relationship where she is going to be having sex early before her temporal lobes are fully developed, okay, she is not going to develop and function naturally or in a good way. That needs to be acknowledged. So science is a very important aspect in this conversation because it directly shows this is harmful, even if the ancient people didn't realize it as much because they were having all sorts of horrible other things they were dealing with, like war and famine and disease and poor nutrition.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not gonna respond to that. Just so like, yeah, like I already made my position clear as to why you would expect, actually, whether you would expect condemnation by Jesus or not. So
You
that's
still
where it
there?
rests upon.
You're
But yeah, can you not hear me?
you just you
Yeah.
kind of like went out for a second.
Okay. Yeah. So did you not hear anything I said at all?
No, not really. It was like a good
Okay.
like 5 second gap.
Okay. So what I was saying was, I'm not going to respond to like the claims that was being made because, I mean, it just rests upon whether you expect Jesus to condemn it or not. Really, that like this is what this argument rests upon. I made the case you would expect. You made the case that you think you wouldn't expect. I'll just leave it up to the audience now to determine whether they would expect such a condemnation or not. So yeah, we can continue. Actually, before we continue the next argument, I want to see because I have heard before you claiming that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a is a pedophile, correct? If I'm not mistaken, do you make that claim?
If you're marrying a 9-year-old and consummating your marriage, well, married at 6 and consummated at 9, that would qualify as a non-exclusive pedophile at that rate.
Sure. So, did Aquinas have in mind that such marriages are allowed
At 9,
younger than 12?
from what I can remember of what he said is that he would have allowed it, but there's like circumstances that would kind of go along with that. But again, I don't really care. Aquinas can just simply be wrong about that.
Sure,
Okay,
he's
again,
wrong,
he's
but I want to see if you'll be consistent with the entailment. So, uh, if someone consummating before the age of 12, meaning someone that reaches physical and mental maturity that is required for marriage preceding the age of 12, according to Aquinas, would that person be classified as a pedophile? And if yes, you're gonna have to say yes to be consistent. I mean, that's something we can be consistent. Then Aquinas, a doctor of the Catholic Church, is teaching that pedophilia is allowed.
okay. Yeah, he's wrong about that. So what? Again, we don't have this strong idea. We have to like look at all of like past theologians and commentators as if they're infallible. There are plenty of things that early church fathers said that I disagree with. I don't think it's consistent with scripture or consistent with ethics or consistent with science. That's just a fact. I don't care.
Sure. Yeah, we can move on. I'm glad you're consistent though. So yeah, he's teaching that pedophilia is okay. Just to clarify.
He, he's teaching it they have to be like physically and mentally developed. But again,
Yeah,
this is a guy who is not dealing with
he's
kids.
making a Muslim argument exactly.
He's not dealing with kids. He's not in his specialty. And he's talking about something for which he has very little knowledge on, considering who he was in his actual field and area of life. So, I mean, like, this is just, I mean, if you want to look at actual medical experts of the day, like Albertus Magnus or Giles of Rome, they were going to say, yeah, this is bad. And again, what were actual kings doing that actually had children? They're delaying the consummation of the marriage. Just going to Thomas Aquinas as if he is like some sort of like pillar on like medical stuff regarding children is like absurd. It'd be like me going to Michael Jordan to
I'm not,
discuss nuclear
I'm not
energy.
claiming, yeah. I'm not claiming that. I'm not saying that because Aquinas agrees with it, hence it's now made more for you and it's binding for you. What I am saying is you're gonna have to concede that a doctor of the Catholic Church is teaching that pedophilia is okay. Now that's a massive corruption. I don't think any Catholic would want to say that Aquinas is allowing for pedophilia. I mean, such entailments is detrimental. Like it's called.
Why
Why would you? Okay, would you take your religion from a pedophile?
would I take my religion from a pedophile? No, my religion comes from Jesus.
Would you? I'm asking. I'm giving you a hypothetical.
I don't understand what you're actually asking here, like in relation to Aquinas. Like, what does this have to do with
Yeah.
anything?
So yeah, it really does because you're not thinking of the entailments of saying that the Prophet Muhammad SAW is a pedophile, and yet when Aquinas says it, you don't want to label it as he's allowing pedophilia. You don't. The words aren't coming out of your mouth, but you're indirectly
I
saying
literally
that.
said what
Now,
he said was wrong. And by the way, it's again,
is it
I can
pedophilia?
simply say these were again, let me finish. I can simply say that yes, it would qualify as pedophilia. Yes, it's wrong. The good news is Aquinas isn't an excellent moral example for humanity. He is not infallible. He's not getting divine revelations from God. So I can simply say he is talking on an area for which he has little knowledge on. It's outside of his area of expertise, and he's making errors. That's all I have to say on this. Trying to focus so much on what Aquinas said is really an Islamic principle because we in Christianity can just simply say, yeah, these past guys were wrong on X, Y, and Z, even though they were right on A, B, and C.
Sure. Now, yeah, that's what pretty much I wanted to get from you. Just as you would
Okay,
say, and Aquinas
let
is
me
just one
be
example.
very
Yeah,
clear then.
go ahead.
Aquinas was absolutely wrong on girls. I have no problem with that. I follow what the science says. Why don't you?
Oh, because I don't do yeah science method. I actually go back to my tradition. I don't go back to modern scientists.
That's a dangerous position to be in. So you're basically saying that science is not going to be a good guide for the world, but you have to follow traditions from the 7th century, not what actual research shows us about how to
Yeah,
actually treat girls and raise them
yeah,
properly.
yeah. Because I mean, a lot of Christians will disagree with you on this. To be fair, when I speak to you about these topics, I feel like I'm speaking to an atheist. To be fair, I mean, your positions a lot of the time are atheistic. You believe Job is a metaphor. You believe the prophet Job is a metaphor. You believe that
No, that's
what
not exactly my
was
position. So no, I had John Bergsma on my channel about a year ago, and he said like, so his idea is that like Job is a real person, but the actual book of Job is like a dramatization, sort of like Shakespeare's play about Julius Caesar. So I've sort of leaned towards that view.
sure, sure, but I mean, maybe saying the figure himself not being real is not right, a representative case of what you're saying. But the my main point is that a lot of people would not take a lot of views that you hold to, whether it be human evolution or the Joe position you take or whatever it might be. For me as a Muslim, and for a lot of traditional people, I would assume they don't think science has any implications on their ethics. You take a different view, which is fine. I'm going to address that, and we're going to deal with the science. We will do that. But just on the principle that apostolic succession deals with the fact that Jesus' teachings and the teachings sent from God are being established clearly for people, and the early church fathers are people that we look up to for morals and ethics. I would never, me as if I was a Christian, I would never want to concede that one of my biggest teachers in the Catholic Church is teaching pedophilia.
So for example, Origen did something that he probably shouldn't have done, which is like castration. He did something like that. Or
He didn't teach that as okay. He didn't teach that as
so
okay though.
there's varying opinions on that from when I read scholars. I mean, these people made mistakes. Origen, of course, taught a theological error of subordinationism. Okay. We don't look at church fathers the way you guys look at some of your Islamic scholars from the early eras. We judge them based on the information they're presenting and if it coheres with scripture. This is why later councils come out and are condemning Tertullian on certain things or Origen on certain things. Okay. Because we can go back to what they say, see if it's in line with scripture or not. We don't have to go, oh my goodness, we have to be in line with everything our church fathers said. That's not a Christian idea.
Has
That's an
any
Islamic idea you're thrusting on us.
has any pope condemned Aquinas for this view?
Not that I'm aware of, but that again, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be.
Sure. So you're just taking a different view. I'm just letting like Christians know that the view you're taking isn't representative of all Christians. A lot of Christians disagree with this. The entailments that come about from such a position is
Show
detrimental,
me, show
as a
me
lot of people
show
say.
me where the majority of Christians today believe that it's okay to marry a 12-year-old and consummate your marriage with a 12-year-old.
The thing is, most people I would assume they would not have be okay with that, but that would actually be because of their ignorance on this topic. Not many people know that Aquinas actually permitted this, or that canon law permitted this, or that the popes don't condemn such things. Once they showed them the
Yeah, and the
evidence,
moment you bring
I'm
it
sure
up,
they
they're
would
going
be
to be
open.
like, yeah, it should be.
I mean, I'll have to disagree on that. I mean, I can't show you any empirical evidence, just anecdotal references from conversations I do have with Catholics and Eastern Orthodox Christians. I mean, I even had a discussion with this Eastern Orthodox Christian where he talked about how he doesn't like how you threw the proto-evangelion of James under the bus. A lot of Christians, especially Orthodox Christians, take a lot of traditions from such a historical document, even though they don't treat it as canon. So, I mean, I'm just showing that your position,
Okay,
not a lot of
all
people would
of
want to
this
take.
is just appealing to popularity. It has nothing to do with the actual question we're supposed to be talking about, whether if it is moral to consummate a marriage with a girl who has reached puberty. Appealing to popularity or popular Christian beliefs does not determine what is moral. Is like William Lane Craig has said, if the Nazis had won the war and had convinced everyone that Nazism is right, that wouldn't make Nazism right. Okay, I could be the only Christian in the world who has these views, and that would not mean I'm wrong, that it is wrong to consummate a marriage with a girl who just reached puberty.
I'm not
So we need to
making a
talk
claim.
about what is objectively the case in
Sure,
terms of
yeah.
ethics and not just constantly going, well, Aquinas said that. I don't care. We're trying to talk about ethics and what's objectively
Sure.
the case. This is why
Uh,
I'm appealing to science, which is a better objective standard than what some doctor of theology said 800 some years ago.
sure. And it's not just resting upon one doctor like saying this being Aquinas. I mentioned Tertullian, Origin, as well as the custom of the Christians for 1700 years, allowing such marriages being the minimum age. It wasn't
False.
just one. Oh my. Okay, I'm gonna give you a reference, but before I do, I wanted to I wanted to actually address one more thing. Um, Give me one sec, just to pull it up. Okay. All right. So I have two sources here
Okay.
about the minimum age of marriage. So one of them I brought up. You didn't actually put in your response to me, but I did include in my video. So the title is "Age of Consent: A Historical Review." I don't know how to pronounce the names, but it's spelled VERNL. Sorry, then space. It'll be L dot and last
Start
name
over.
B
Spell that
U.
again.
So VERN,
Okay.
and then yeah, the last one would just be BULLOUGH. The summary of this historical review says the age of consent throughout history has usually coincided with the age of puberty, although at some times it has been as early as 7. Early on age of consent was a familial or tribal matter and only became a legal one in the Greco-Roman period. The Roman tradition served as the base for Christian Europe, as well as the Christian church itself, which generally, essentially based upon biological development, set it at 12 or 14, but continued to set the absolute minimum at 7.
Okay.
So
So
I
you're
give you
you're citing the
I
you're
gave you a
citing the
historical review
American
about the minimum.
historian, right?
Yeah, but before you reply, uh, I'm giving you one historical review overview, sorry, but I can give you other sources as well. But you haven't given me anything that would actually give me any contradictory view on whether the early church didn't believe such a practice was okay. I'm giving you one right now that actually suggests that the minimum age, absolute minimum, was 7. Right. So if you could give me a study that contradicts this, I'll be willing to look into it.
So you're citing a guy who specializes in American history and sexologist, right?
Sure.
Okay. Kim Phillips is actually a medieval historian. Okay. She actually went through and showed that no, that throughout Europe, for example, they were not doing that. This was again around the age of 20 is when
No,
these marriages were
bro,
mostly occurring.
you keep doing this. You keep doing the average age thing.
Now,
Show
again,
me the
can I
minimum age.
finish?
Go
Okay,
ahead.
so minimum age is 12. Okay. It also doesn't say
Thank you.
consummation. Okay. But
Oh
again,
my,
you're
come on.
assuming that let me finish. Okay. You're assuming, for example, consummation is going to happen. You're also assuming that they just said, yeah, every 12-year-old is just fine. It's very clear that when you read what they're saying, they said it could be possibly as early as 12 if they're ready for it, like if they've developed or something. That just is not how it practically ever played out. And we have no evidence that a 12-year-old would actually be ready at that point. This seems to be more of like when you get to canon law, is like Phillips or as like Sattler talks about with it comes to Jewish ideas. These are like ideals. These are not actually the way these are practically playing out, which is problematic. So, you, for example, have like, for example, law in the US that, minimum age is like 18. That's rarely how it practically plays out because most people aren't ready for marriage until they're in their 20s now. So just because you have these ideals set, that doesn't mean that's practically what's playing out or that, like they actually think that about 12-year-olds on like happening
Of
in their
course,
society.
I don't even agree that um, this is a minimum, absolute minimum, or every 12-year-old would be ready. I don't even agree with that, right? Some
I
12-year-olds,
don't
they
think there's
wouldn't be
any evidence
developed enough.
any 12-year-old will be ready.
Okay, well, you're contradicting 1700 years of Christian tradition because they do say 12-year-olds can actually meet it, with there being even exceptions below that. So
Okay, but the
the reason
science
why they would put it at 12,
shows you they're not.
sure, like, I'm, I don't take my morals or ethics. I don't think Christians would mostly have the basis of their morals and ethics coming from science either. But I'm just gonna give one more question before we get into because I do want to talk about the age of menarche, the average age, and so on. Um, so my question is this: is your response only possible with the entailment of the falsehood of the Catholic Church, given that the Catholic Church actually allows, for my view, so the only way to object to Islam at this point with your argument is to relinquish Catholicism. Is that correct?
To relinquish Catholicism. I don't get what you're asking here. So they said a minimum age is like 12, but the girl has to be ready. That does not mean they're saying, yeah, this should happen for 12-year-olds.
I
Like
mean,
you have to understand there's a
yeah,
difference between like an ideal in terms of like what they say they're saying is sort of like in legal theory, it could possibly have happened this early in their ideas, and they're just simply wrong about that. I don't have to condemn the entire Catholic theology because they're wrong about one issue here. That doesn't follow.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So just give me 1 second. Is my voice still clear?
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay. Yeah. My question would just be that can someone be a Catholic and view these views as immoral? The answer is no. Like you can't contradict the statements of the popes, neither the statements
Yes,
of
you can.
neither,
Yes, you can.
wait 1 second. Let me clarify that. A statement of a pope or that doesn't contradict predecessors who conform to this view, you can't condemn that. Like it just contradicts fundamental Catholic doctrines, and it's just it's just a really
No,
liberal.
there are
So
Catholics that disagree. For example, Joshua Sijuwati is a social Trinitarian, yet Catholic theology teaches Latin Trinitarianism. Okay, you don't have to agree with the Pope on everything. You got a weird view of how the Catholic Church works.
no, I never said everything. I said on doctrines that they allow that don't contradict their predecessors. So no pope preceding them, or no doctor preceding them, or no early church father preceding them, ever contradicting their view. If you're going to posit something new, I mean, you're throwing 1700 years of tradition under the bus.
Again,
I mean, yeah,
this is irrelevant to the actual conversation we're supposed to be having, whether or not it's moral. You just keep appealing to popularity or ideas in the past as
no,
if that supports your idea.
I'm positing that a Catholic would find it moral.
Okay,
Catholic could find it moral.
okay, you can posit that. That's completely irrelevant to the actual topic. Why can't we debate the topic? Why do you have to
Sure.
keep playing? Yeah, well, this guy in the past said it was okay. Well, that guy was wrong.
I'm showing you that your view isn't representative of the norm,
So,
moral outlook. I mean, that's not gonna be a problem for you, but a lot of Christians find a problem with that.
okay,
Now,
you're just trying to like do character assassination. You're trying to say, look, Christians, he doesn't agree with what Thomas Aquinas said 800 years ago on this issue that Thomas Aquinas wasn't an expert on. Okay, I think most Christians would agree with me that you
yeah,
shouldn't
but
be
that's
consummating a
a straw
marriage to a
man,
9-year-old or a 12-year-old.
that's a straw man because I'm not. My whole argument isn't relying upon that. It's relying upon 1700 years of Catholic, not just Catholic, but early church tradition,
That
where the
doesn't
men believed
determine
in
what is
seven.
moral
Sure,
necessarily.
no, sure, no. Yeah, well, a lot of people would assume that they wouldn't legislate pedophilia for a good 1700 years.
Doesn't
So yeah,
determine if it's moral.
no worries. I want to talk about the average age of monarchy now. So I agree with you that the average age of monarchy would be probably between like 13 to 14 during the medieval ages. But really, what you're saying when you say that is you're saying that the average medieval person living in those times, so the average woman, would be menstruating between 13 and 14 because they weren't nutritioned well, right? That's mainly what it is. Nutrition is the main factor. And I agree with you on that. You mentioned that many times. I agree. The studies say this as well. They all agree. Okay. Now, you believe that Aisha menstruated.
I have no opinion on whether she did or not. I
Okay.
I would say
Um,
this. So I would say it's very, very unlikely that she did because it's not just based on nutrition. It's also based on family genetics. So like, for example, science shows, for example, I know you're not all for science and all, but let's bring it in here. Science shows, for example, what a mother eats while she is carrying the child will help determine not only the genetics of her own child, but the grandchildren. Because again, when a girl is developing in the womb, she's getting all her eggs that she'll eventually, release when she reaches menarche. So what you're eating determines not only your own genetic, it can also affect your own genetics, your epigenetics, but also your children and your grandchildren. This is why we see in the modern era, the age of menarche is slowly coming down because it takes generations to get down. It's not just something, hey, well, luckily we had this one girl and we just happened to hit the lottery and now we're feeding her like crazy. And lo and behold, menarche is coming early for her. It's based on also family history of the nutritional past.
sure. So, yeah, I think race has a role to play in early monarchy. I can cite some studies now, so you can pull them up and maybe have a look at them. So the first one is maturational timing and overweight prevalence in U.S. adolescent girls. That's the first study I'm going to cite. In this study, it says that overall, early maturing girls were nearly twice as likely as average maturing girls to be overweight. So there's a clear link between eating a lot and gaining a lot of weight compared to girls that aren't doing so, right? They also cited that significantly higher proportions of Black and Hispanic girls experience menarche before the 11 years of age,
Yep.
so 10 and under, right? Now, there's a correlation, as I showed like in a table. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I remember there was a table presented where they showed the high correlation between like certain types of races and certain practices of like eating a ton and gaining a lot of weight, right? Now, we actually have a hadith where Aisha was eating a lot to the point where she said she grew plump, right, prior to consummation. Meaning we have evidence to gain to. So we're not just saying it's possible she menstruated, or it's possible she reached the age of physical maturity. We're saying that it's probable that she did based upon the evidence. Now I have another one to because that study doesn't go through Arab girls. There is a study done in Kuwait, age at monarchy and its relationships to body mass index amongst adolescent girls in Kuwait. And what they find is that girls under the age of between the ages of 10 and younger, it posits that 8.5% of the participants reached the age of monarchy in these ages, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so the way you're trying to frame it as like is like, oh, we hit the lottery. No, bro, like that's not the case. There's clear evidence that based on Aisha being of a higher socioeconomic status, her gaining a lot of weight, her being of Arab descent, these play factors on a girl reaching monarchy early, and I have reasons to believe now on a probable framework, not just a possible case here, that she did reach monarchy. So that's all I wanted to say on that topic.
So that still makes it immoral. She's still
Sure,
9.
no
Her
worries.
temporal lobes are not developed. Her
But do you,
hips have not developed.
do you
She's
at
going to
least, yeah,
severe several
sure,
mental disorders because you're engaging in activity that no 9-year-old should ever engage in.
sure. Do you at least agree, at least like just on the basis of me making a probabilistic case that I've shown you some evidence that maybe you weren't exposed to before that does increase the likelihood that she would reach the age of monarchy?
I will say this, I will look into it. I still think it's unlikely because, again, you even mentioned you mentioned 8%
Yeah,
possibility.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. And again, this is based on like modern girls where there's a lot more nutrition and we see the age of menarche coming down. I will look into those studies. But again, this is completely irrelevant. I have never said like, because Aisha didn't reach menarche, therefore it was immoral what Muhammad, that has never been my argument. Even if I said in the videos, even if by some miracle she did, still immoral because you're setting her up for all sorts of physical issues if she were to get pregnant and the mental disorders are going to start flowing in. It's immoral.
okay.
You should not be putting any girl through that. And again, it wasn't even common at the time. We know this because we can look at the various different cultures and they're delaying
Yeah, I agree it
marriage
wasn't common.
and most mainly consummation of marriage until later years.
Yeah, I agree. I agree it wasn't common. Now, this isn't my position, but this is a possible case I could make. But I don't really care on age numbers, to be honest. I care more so on the criteria. What would you make of someone saying the position that Aisha got her age wrong on the basis that she didn't have
Oh,
access to a calendar?
I will give you that. In fact, I want Muslims to take that view. So for example, I was talking with Javed Hashmi. I don't know if you like him. Most Muslims don't, but uh, and like I think I said something to the effect. It was on Twitter. Like I really wish Muslims would just take the view that Aisha was like 18 and the hadiths are wrong, because that would lower child
No,
marriage.
no. So no, no,
That's what
no.
I want to see.
So just to clarify, I'm not positing that claim because that's not rational at all. It leads to so many problems. But what I'm positing that isn't unorthodox, just to give like a quick outline, we accept that Bukhari has sahih transmissions or authentic transmissions to those people that are saying these things, right? So I accept, based upon this view, which I don't take personally, but it is a view out there. If someone accepts that Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, did say that she reached the age of 9 and she consummated, but they don't reject her testimony based upon her being unreliable, but more so because she didn't have anything accessible to her to actually determine her exact age, and she just estimated wrong, right? Based on this view, they would just say that she's probably older than 9, maybe 10, 11, even 12, like pushing it maybe. But all we know is that as soon as she reached physical maturity, as soon as she reached the age of monarchy, which would probably be an early one based upon like the hadith I showed, yeah, that's pretty much when she consummated. I don't take that view, but would that be a view that you think would? Because I mean, the Catholic position I presented before, or the classical position of Christians, has always been the age of 12 as the minimum, or even exceptions if she reached menstruation before. Do you think such a position would be something that you'd be more open to consider as moral,
No,
or do you think okay, no, no worries, yeah, that's fine. I mean, that is another position. So she could be a bit older, but you still think that a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, they're still not able to. Okay, that's fine. I don't even take that view, but I'm just positing that to show you that it's not even definitive whether she reached the age of 9 or not. What is definitive is that she reached the age of menarche. So, getting to
Yeah, I'm
another
not
point.
convinced she did. So I never, I want to be clear for people in the chat. I never said I agree that she did. Okay. Again, I think it's irrelevant to whether it's moral or not. So
Yeah, of
again,
course. Of
I know
course.
Muslims go make a lot of arguments trying to argue that she did reach menarche. It's irrelevant to what I've been arguing and the problems of child marriage. If a girl reaches menarche at like 7 today, it would still be wrong to marry her off and consummate the marriage.
Yeah, I
Children
agree.
can't
Yeah, yeah,
consent.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm glad you agree. Do you think, I have a question for you. Do you think girls today should marry before 18, or it should be okay for certain girls to marry before 18?
18 is not really like 18 seems really arbitrary to me. What I would say is prior to mental maturity, they shouldn't consummate. That would probably be between like in Western societies, it'd be between like 15 to 18.
Okay, so since we know, for example, puberty in girls is not complete till the ages of 15 to 17, we know the temporal lobes are developing around the same time.
Yeah.
Why would 18 not be the perfect age? Because we see mental development reaches a good point, physical development, the hips have fully widened. So that happens between the stages of 15 and 17.
Sure.
Why would 18 not be a pretty good age right after that to grant a status of adulthood? We can't give every girl a medical exam, obviously, and a
Yeah.
neurological exam. So it just makes sense that 18, it's not an arbitrary number.
Sure. I still okay. I do see it kind of arbitrary still because you still supplicate like you're still saying that um if some girls I would even say I think most girls actually reach the end of puberty and these mental developments that you're talking about prior to 18. I think that most actually do happen prior to 18.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. Look, I'm agreeing with you there. Yes, I said 15 to 17 is when most girls complete puberty. But again, we're talking about on a societal level. How do we grant the status of adulthood? Okay, the stage is complete. Tanner stage 5 is complete. 15 to 17.
yep.
Therefore, the following year, it just makes sense. That's adulthood.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Islam says like just in the same way as certain things that aren't like wajib or things that aren't compulsory. It's not compulsory for someone to get married before the age of 18. It's not something that's like stopping my Islamic practices. So if I'm living in a country where it says it's 18, I allow for that, and I agree to that for that age to an extent where I don't believe girls in Western context have mental maturity. I agree with that, but I think the minimum at 18 I wouldn't necessarily agree with in all cases. But it doesn't really affect me. We follow the law of the land. The law of the land says it's 18. I don't have much like I don't have qualms about that. I'm not saying let's. I mean, maybe to an extent I would like. I don't have qualms about keeping it at 18 or putting it at 16 or 17. I'm
Okay,
not advocating for it. I'm not
fair enough.
advocating for it being 9 today. But what
Okay,
I am saying is is this though. I'm saying that an optimal age range of someone consummating doesn't equate to someone. So just because it's not optimal, so younger than 18 or maybe older than 40, I don't believe that to be immoral. So I do agree. Maybe optimal is between 18 and 25. Maybe that is optimal, but that
okay,
doesn't. That's not my standard of
fair enough.
morality.
But you agree that age 18 is not, we're not just arbitrarily picking a number. There's actually good reason why we set it at 18. It's not arbitrary. Like we have good reasons to say that.
I mean, putting an exact number on anything on this topic, I see as in some sense arbitrary, but I see what you're saying.
Okay,
Putting an exact number, I don't agree with putting an exact number.
so let's talk about the whole optimal issue because you did say in one of your videos that you were talking about the Spartans, I believe, that they delayed that because it was more optimal for them to have children. But I mean, and then you also now just mentioned like problems over 40. But what doesn't come with 40 is all of the mental issues. So there's a study called I put in my videos, Overlooked and Addressed, a narrative review of mental health consequences of child marriage. This was one of the papers I've been citing for years.
Where's the papers on on mental health issues over 45?
It's sorry, so you mean the paper mentions 45? What?
No, no. What I'm saying is, where are the have you looked at papers looking into possible mental health issues caused by getting married later? Have you looked into that?
Yes, divorce actually increases when you start marrying past the age of like 35. So it's like actually we do see an increase in mental issues
Okay, there you go.
related around that. Yeah.
There you
So, but no, not related to child marriage. It's far worse when it comes to child marriage. So they note numerous issues that revive. And this was a study that looked in, this was a review that looked at various studies in 34 countries. So they're looking at Iran, Jordan, Turkey, US, Vietnam, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Ethiopia. What they're finding is like early marriage increased depression risk by 2.77 times greater, even adjusting for substance abuse, unemployment, age, residence, other negative things. Those married early had higher rates of adjustment disorder associated with lower education, self-confidence, decision-making power, freedom and mobility. They demonstrated this in numerous countries, higher rates of suicidal thoughts as well,
Yep.
psychiatric disorders. And this is also just one. I have other studies, like an umbrella study that looked at specifically at sexual interaction with children. Again,
Yep.
crazy amount of psychiatric disorders that are not going to result like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder from like a 40-year-old having sex. So again,
Sure.
there's no comparison in terms of mental disorders. Okay, it's not even just like it's optimal between 18 and 25. It's downright causing whole sorts of horrible issues prior to these ages
Yeah.
when they're children.
Yeah, I agree. There's a mismatch between if you just allow me to finish my point. Just give me a sec to pull it up.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it was the Gluckman study. If I could just pull it up. Give me one sec. Yeah, so I might not have it on me. Actually, no, I do. Okay.
What's the name of it?
So it's the Gluckman study where it shows the psychosocial maturation, how there's a mismatch. There's a mismatch in the modern age, right? That doesn't appear in the pre-modern times. So what the study says is, for the first time in our evolutionary history, biological puberty in females significantly precedes, rather than being matched to the age of successful functioning as an adult. This is mentioned in figure 2. This mismatch between the age of biological and psychosocial maturation constitutes a fundamental issue for modern society. Our social structures have been developed in the expectation of longer childhood, prolonged education and training, and later reproductive competence. This emerging mismatch creates fundamental pressures on contemporary adolescents on how they live in society. Okay, so based on this, right, based on the fact that the conditions have set for girls to mature later, and the society's been constructed in such a way where we didn't have teenagehood prior to the Industrial Revolution. We didn't have this period where there's a delay on mental maturity that we do have now, right? Based on this, yeah, I agree. A girl in a Western context today doesn't have the ability to consent, and it will lead to mental problems. I agree with that.
So the study you're talking about is talking about psychosocial aspects, not neurological or brain development. Temporal lobes were still taking as long to develop 2,000 years ago as they are today.
What's
The prefrontal
yeah,
cortex still took as long to develop as it did today.
Yeah,
When you talk about psychosocial
I
maturation,
just
you're talking about incorporation into a society.
Sure. So my standard, because obviously, obviously we're not gonna neuro scan people's brains, right, to determine things. I believe this is a very, very bad way to determine when someone's mentally mature, and I have stuff on me right now that goes into this, right? So this is like a misnomer that the development of brains or neuroscans is a good way to determine when someone's mentally mature. I look at it from a pragmatic sense, whether we can see that she can function or not within a particular context. As we can see today, that's not the case. Little girls can't pragmatically function as an adult today within Western context at all, and we see that with the mismatch. Now, the study I'm going to cite now is Adolescent Maturity and the Brain, the Promise and Pitfalls of Neuroscience Research and Adolescent Health Policy. And in 2 quotes I want to mention, it goes into how this is a very bad way to determine when someone actually is mentally mature. So 2 quotes I'm going to give is one, it comes after footnote 10. It says, although neuroscience has been called upon to determine adulthood, there is little empirical evidence to support the age of 18, the current legal age of majority, as an accurate marker of adult capacities. Less clear is whether neuroimaging at present helps to inform age-based determinations of maturity. Second quote, this is the subtitle, what we do not know about brain development in adolescence. In many respects, neuroimaging research is in its infancy. There is much to be learned about how changes in brain structure and function relate to adolescent behavior. As of yet, however, neuroimaging studies do not allow a chronologic cut point for behavioral or cognitive maturity at either the individual or population level. The ability to designate an adolescent as mature or immature neurologically is complicated by the fact that neuroscientific data are continuous and highly variable from person to person. So I don't think it's a good way to determine when someone's ready.
Well, the good news is I didn't say it was just neuroscience. I also cited psychological and sociological research. So I noted there was a convergence there with the development of the temporal lobes and the rise of mental disorders. So again, if children are engaging in sexual activity prior to when they're completing puberty, we see a rise in all sorts of mental disorders. So there's a convergence here. Now, if I was just making an argument from neuroimaging, sure, you have a point there, but I didn't do that. I said there's a convergence of different aspects in different areas. Neuroscience, psychology, sociology, as well as historical precedents as well, you could cite.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's that going on there. So no,
yeah.
hold on, let me finish here.
Go ahead, go
So,
ahead.
and again, the other thing to keep in mind here, though, is that, again, we're also talking about physical development. So the widening of the hips is also going to be important for bearing children. So again, if it was just neuroimaging, I might have to agree with you. But again, we can see studies done on child marriage. We can see them creating poor parenting skills and developing all sorts of mental issues. Through all of these aspects, we can see it's far better to wait to 18, and having girls who can't consent engaging in marriage prior to that, they're going to be messed up. And that's just what the research shows.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just put that to the mismatch. If you're gonna say this is like a holistic view, we are taking into account sociological, so including psychosocial maturity, then yeah, there's a mismatch. So today I would advocate that it's not okay. So
Well, let's talk about the mismatch though, because again, when the Gluckman study talks about psychosocial, it's talking about what they need to sort of like develop and live in society. So if you read Kim Phillips' book, okay, girls were not necessarily expected in the medieval period to get like a college education.
yeah,
Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. They had to learn how to manage a household, and she says this wasn't even, they weren't even really at that point till like 16 or so, or around that kind of time. So when you have a psychosocial aspect, you only expect girls to manage households. You would expect them to be more ready to integrate into society at early ages. However, that doesn't mean their brains are ready for sex. That doesn't mean their bodies are ready for sex either. It just means they're able to sort of function in society, like do household chores kind of thing, earlier time periods, like help with the farming, perhaps, that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean they're ready to actually start bearing children, let alone engage in sex. So you can't take psychosocial and assume that's entirely full mental development.
Yeah, sure. I don't want you to like shift the goalpost to physical like negative consequences. We can get into that like maybe after, yeah, just after this statement. So yeah, my closing statement regarding that would just be that if you're taking this holistic view of like taking into account everything, and you're trying to draw like a correlation between all these aspects, I would just say that yeah, like the neuroscience itself, as well as the social sciences, and the cases where I also wanted to mention that in Islam, our position isn't that every girl that just reaches puberty is automatically ready. There's going to be conditions that has to be met, and her father actually has to see that such a marriage, a betrothal, and early consummation gives her great benefit. So it's not the case that every young girl would actually be able to do this. And Aisha, even, may Allah be pleased with her, she was a great exception to be at the ages of 9, 10, and 11 to consummate, because she was seen as like a prodigy. We even have like a hadith where she was betrothed to someone before the Prophet even, which was, his name was Jubair. And Jubair's parents broke off the betrothal because they were scared that Aisha would convert Jubair because of how intellectual she was even at such a young age. She was learning, adaptive, and she managed to learn a lot of things early, and it showed like in the rest of her life. She was one of the greatest Islamic scholars, one of the highest narrators of ahadith. So yeah, like it's so complicated, and there's many variables to be taken into account, especially from a case-to-case basis. Not everyone's the same on mental maturity, and with all this like all these variables that you did present, presenting it with just okay, we have a certain age bracket based on the evidence isn't definitive at all. I'll be satisfied taking my Quran and Hadith as my definitive source of when marriage is allowed and what's the minimum ages, as I think like many Christians would be satisfied with. If you want to take science as even though it's based on induction, it's based upon a lot of like different variables in this instance specifically even. That's entirely up to you, but I don't see it as convincing at all for me to shift my position.
So you
for my position to be.
want to take sources that are thousands of years old or on how to determine when girls are ready for marriage, not on modern scientific research, various sociological reports that have looked at various subjects and the effects, as well as all sorts of other factors as well, like in terms of hip development. You're more comfortable going off what people said thousands of years ago about medical aspects of girls, not what modern people have with all of our technology.
Yeah, so I do take the position that despite it being thousands of years ago, I have my tradition usurp. It takes precedence over science. I have a definitive source of information that gives me my morals, my ethics. We have a indefinitive source of information being like science, and you making these inferences and these correlations.
It's ironic because Toby Huff in his book The Rise of Modern Science says this is exactly why modern sciences didn't rise in Islam. They used science to sort of help with Islamic law as much as possible, and then when they were done with it, they discarded it. So it's just kind of ironic that you have like these, you don't allow for this type of advancement here that we see in Christendom, which is going to slow progress, and it's going to lead to harm done to girls. You sort of set these infallible aspects early on. You don't allow for like a virtue ethical development, which again, we see it leads to harm for girls. We see child marriage rampant throughout the Islamic world.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, we don't develop our ideas on what seems to be moral and immoral. Like we have a set standard and we stick by it. So I'm gonna present other aspects because you wanted to bring up like hip development and so on, or like fistulas or like other physical complications, right? Just give me a minute to pull these up.
Okay, just to be clear, you actually basically just admitted your religion is a religion for the 7th century and not for the modern era, because we have gone so much further. And when you have Christendom, which allows for the 2 books, you're basically admitting that, hey, we have one religion that allows for advances in science to help us better understanding our ethics. Even Galileo's own opponents said if they were wrong and Galileo was right, that just means they didn't interpret scripture properly. So they allowed for this kind of development in terms of science to better understand the scriptures, to better understand nature, to better understand the body. It's very terrifying to say we should just stick with what the ethics were in the 7th century and not allow any scientific development to help us advance and better understand that.
No worries. I'm gonna close it off with this. Then we can maybe get into like the physical harms. Alhamdulillah, yeah, we say like the companions, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they gave us the best morals to emulate, which did come from the 7th century.
Then why doesn't that manifest in reality? Why do we see when studies when Christianity and Islam are compared? When studies, when they compare Christianity and Islam, we see Islam deteriorates and actually slows progress down in terms of like political aspects, as well as ethical aspects. I mean, I've got so much studies when they looked at both of them. Islam slows progress. It doesn't help it.
Okay. If you just allow me to finish, because I'll let you finish now. So,
Fine, go ahead.
As I was saying, so when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, alhamdulillah, we take them as the moral exemplars of our religion. Despite them coming 1,000+ years ago, they're still the moral exemplars. We always go back to them. We go back to the Quran and the Sunnah and the pious way of the righteous predecessors. I mean, taking your position, you're going to have to say that the disciples were wrong on moral issues, despite them being taught by Jesus.
Yes, that's the whole point of the Gospels. Peter denied Jesus. Of course he was wrong in certain ways.
No,
there was a story, I believe.
And more aspects being taught by Jesus. So there's a presupposition amongst like people from apostolic churches where they say that the early church, they are presenting what Jesus actually would have thought to be moral or immoral based upon what he taught. And based on that, they would say they are the forerunners of the religion. The early church, the disciples, they teach us our morals and ethics, not modern liberal scientists.
On theology, they're who we go to. But again, we actually go to scripture, which we believe is inspired by the Holy Spirit. But again, if you just read the Gospels, you see the disciples messing up all the time. I mean, one of the disciples betrayed Jesus. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. They all abandoned Jesus right before the crucifixion. We don't have this idea that they're like perfect. Jesus worked through imperfect people to do great things. This is a huge Christian idea that you go through the Old Testament prophets. God is always working through imperfect people. David messes up. Moses messes up. Abraham messes up. That's a Christian idea. We don't look at the apostles as if they're morally perfect. We look at Jesus, who's the only morally perfect one. We don't even consider Paul to be morally perfect.
Sorry, that's not my claim. What I'm claiming is them being exemplars in what they taught. Sure, they can do mistakes, they can commit like sins, of course, but in terms of what they taught, they are the moral exemplars and the moral standard for what we go to determine what is moral and immoral. So I'm not making a claim that
Jesus, not Peter.
Just Jesus. No, the disciples they could make mistakes in morality, sure, in what they're teaching, even for 1,000+ years up until the modern age where we have to determine what's right and wrong. Sure. Okay.
Outside of
So,
scripture, they can make, outside of teaching what's in scripture, they can make fallible errors. It's always been a Christian ideal.
sure. Even in regards to teaching morality, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Let's get into the next one because I mean, well, you brought up I believe physical detriments, which I disagree as being as a sort of issue. Um, okay, so if you just make your case,
What do you want me to say?
so like physical detriments that come about through like young marriages, what's the claim here exactly?
Because the hips have not fully widened and the human head is big. So when you have a hard time pushing that out, you can develop things like obstetric fistulas, maternal death. Also, we see low birth weight coming out from teen marriages. So the infants don't even develop properly. So yeah, low birth weight is a huge issue for early teen marriages. I can pull up this one study here if you want. It actually has an interesting thing I want to read in it. So the study is Economic Impacts of Child Marriage, a review of the literature. And one of the things they say in this, so let me just read: the combination of girls being physically immature and the lack of proper medical care during pregnancy and childbirth puts adolescent mothers at a higher risk of complications during gestation and delivery, including prolonged and obstructed labor, fistula, and death. Complications of pregnancy and childbirth are the second leading cause of death among adolescent girls, 15 to 19 globally, with nearly 70,000 dying each year, according to the World Health Organization.
Sure. So what are the causes for these like obstetric fistulas and these complications, as it says?
They mentioned fistulas, yes.
Yeah, but what's the causes for them? What do they say exactly?
So fistula is when
No,
you
I know,
tear in the
no,
birth canal.
I know what a fistula is. I'm asking what are the causes of these fistulas developing, or what did they say?
Trying to deliver a child.
No, what are the causes that hide in the likelihood of these fistulas occurring?
I'm not sure what you're asking now.
Okay,
So you need to
what I'm saying is the causes of these fistulas to come about.
what causes fistulas to come about? Again, it's trying to have a child at an early age. I don't understand what else you're asking beyond that. Oh wait, he froze. He's got a bad internet. Let's just wait for him
Yeah,
to come
sorry,
back.
I got like an important phone call. Sorry.
Do
Yeah, so
you need to go soon?
No, I don't have to go. I don't have to go. I just had to take that phone call. So yeah, what I was saying was the causes of these fistulas isn't reduced to them being younger. I agree that that has a important role to play. The study that you cited yourself even says that older age plays a role, right? Older age actually plays a role in developing fistulas. Another thing, right? Now, the problem is that these high likelihood of fistulas, obstetric fistulas, isn't solely because their pelvises haven't grown to a great enough extent. Actually, as you were reading, which I wanted you to pick up on, which was the medical access they actually had. It actually says in what you just quoted. So the medical access that they have plays a big role. When these studies are conducted, they're conducted in Cameroon, Nigeria, like Mali, right? Now these developing countries, you would assume that these younger girls, they would have less access to medical care because they don't have free healthcare. They probably live further away from the hospitals and so on. They would have to probably give birth in their houses, which is mentioned in that study that you cited in your TikToks. So yeah, it plays a big role, and that's partially why these obstetric fistulas do develop. Even in the development of these obstetric fistulas, they're quite low from what I saw. I think it was 0.18%, and that number would have to go down if we did take into account what I just said regarding their limited access from younger ages to medical facilities because of them coming from lower socioeconomic statuses. So taking that into account, if we had an actual study where they all have proper access to medical care, I think that younger girls would have a similar rate of obstetric fistulas as older women getting impregnated.
Define older. What age range are you saying?
40 plus.
Okay, yeah, 40 plus. It's very harmful for a woman to try to have a
Did you
child
say
at
more?
that point. No, because you're talking about an consenting adult. They can agree to it when they've been made aware. However,
Okay,
I will add this. Hold on, I will add this.
You're
Hold
begging
on.
the question because I already
No, I'm
disputed
not
that.
because you're talking. No, because you're talking about a child who can't consent. if you take a let's go higher, let's go 13-year-old, you marry her and you have a child with her. She didn't consent to that. She doesn't know what's happening. Okay, a 40-year-old can consent.
I
Now,
don't
I
believe
will
that.
say if a 40-year-old is told by her doctor, do not have children, you'll likely die, and she does anyway, that is immoral because her family is relying on her, and you don't put yourself at
I
risk when
agree
your
with that.
family needs you.
That is something in Islam we agree with. Yes.
Okay, so there, I can make that admission for the 40-year-old, but for the 13-year-old, it's even worse because you have someone who can't even consent, and you're putting her through a
Okay,
process she
okay,
doesn't
okay.
even fully
But
understand.
let's say you grant my position because right now, obviously, like I'm giving you my outlook on how I deal with these statistics, right? If you grant my assumption that they can consent, these younger women can actually consent. What's the symmetry breaker?
What's the what?
What's the symmetry breaker between the two? What's the
Well,
thing that distinguishes one as moral and immoral?
you're assuming that somehow a 13-year-old is an adult. That changes the entire game.
Yeah,
So I
sure,
mean, you're just basically saying
but the
like,
whole
what if I
point,
was already
yeah.
right and a 13-year-old was an adult? Okay, then yeah, a 13-year-old's an adult, but this 13-year-old isn't an adult, so it doesn't change anything.
Sure, but the point being that the principle here isn't really much on harm. It's more so consenting to that harm. But when you present it in your videos, you're making it seem like this is a death sentence or that there's some sort of harm that's restricted to younger marriages. When in fact, like older marriages, geriatric pregnancies, which is pregnancies above the age of 35, they're 6.5 times more likely to have mothers dying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot. That is higher even than younger marriages from the stats you provided, which is 4 times more likely. And also,
Yeah.
it's not even a good comparison. Also, because the study that you brought was from Venezuela. The study I brought was from the U.S. The second point would be that regarding complications, also the likelihood of a woman giving birth to a baby that has Down syndrome is 42 times more likely, which is in one in 35. One in 35 pregnancies, which is about 2.5% of pregnancies coming back from geriatric ones.
And as
They actually,
I said in my
that,
debate with Daniel Hakikachu, if
yeah,
a doctor tells a woman over 40 not to have a child, she should not have a child.
yeah, but this the statistics I'm bringing you isn't even that high. To be fair, like it is 2.5%, but I don't think that would necessarily stop someone from getting having a pregnancy above the age of 45. Might be something that they think about, but it's not necessarily something immoral. Now, so just on the aspect of harm, uh, going back to what I was saying before with the early church, they would have the knowledge that like older pregnancies or younger pregnancies have these harms, not because I'm bringing isolated cases, but because generally speaking, when they see younger marriages or older marriages coming about and pregnancies coming about, they see these harms actually occurring throughout these sort of outlying pregnancies. Despite that, what I'm going to say is they had that knowledge. They witnessed all these infant mortalities, all these maternal mortalities, all of these morbidities that come about from these pregnancies. And despite that, they're using the same harm principle you're using, and they're saying it's not immoral. But you're saying sorry, they're saying that, yeah, I believe, yeah, they're saying that it's not immoral, but you're saying it's immoral.
Okay.
Now, what gives you the authority? Because what actually gives you the authority to actually say that the harm or the risk is so high that it should be considered immoral? But for 1700 years, these early church members don't have the authority, despite them knowing this.
Okay. Lot there. Let me respond to everything. Let's start with the church. Okay, for one thing, no, we do see people in the medieval period saying that it should be delayed because the seed is too weak, as I mentioned before. Okay, you're assuming that a lot of the early church fathers were writing up like medical treatises. That's not what they were focusing on. So again, you have non-medical experts writing mostly on non-medical subjects. And again, we see from research like Brent Shaw that Christians were marrying later. So this wasn't like happening around them like crazy. They weren't, the church was not seeing in like the 300s, 12-year-olds getting married and expected to have a child at the age 12 left and right. You're assuming this was so common, they should have wrote about it. So your argument from silence doesn't even work there. Now, again, what gives me the authority on this? Again, I've never said that just because there is one or two harm aspects involved, that therefore it is wrong. I've given multiple reasons. Mental development, engaging in one of my biggest issues with child marriage is not even childbearing, it's engaging a child in sexual behavior, because that messes them up mentally, as I've told you earlier in this live. Okay, then you also have on top of that the complications from the physical aspects. So unlike someone over 40, you don't have the excessive mental issues where they're going to develop psychiatric disorders because you're having them engage in sex early on when their temporal lobes are still developing, and they develop all these sort of disorders from that. The physical aspects are on top of the fact that you're putting a young child who can't consent, who doesn't know what's going on, and expecting her to bear a child at an early age where she's going to be frightened, where she's not going to really understand what's going on. Then you're expecting her to raise that child when she's not even mentally developed. You're going to have it, everyone loses with this because you're going to be raising children. You're going to have children raising children, and they're not going to actually have. And this is what the studies I have actually say: the children don't even develop properly out of the ones that come out of child marriages because they don't develop the right social skills. They don't have as much intelligence as women in their 20s raising children or in their 30s. So it's a collection of issues. It's not just one or the other things. The biggest thing is going to be the mental issues. And then on top of that, they have to bear children where they have a higher risk of death or of developing a fistula. I mean, you're just compounding factor after factor after a while.
Sure. So, just to move on from this point, because I got your perspective now. I just want to ask one question before moving on. So, if we do remove consent, just to clarify, and we just have harm between the two, you would be, if we have consenting in a hypothetical, consenting 12, 13-year-olds, and we have consenting 45, 40-year-olds, and we have the harm principle here to determine whether it's moral or not. You're saying that it's either both are moral or both are immoral right now, because we have just harm being the variable here and not consent within this hypothetical.
Okay, are you including in the harm the mental aspects I mentioned?
I'm saying, yeah, as I said, like the assumption here is if you would assume that they can consent, there wasn't that variable in play. Because right now we're just talking about harm. We talked about mental maturity before. I don't want to combine the two. We're talking specifically here harm as a point. Without these mental damages, a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old having relations and giving birth, would that be considered morally okay, putting to the side mental maturity?
Putting aside mental maturity.
Yeah.
So
So
I think that
you have a consenting person. You have a consenting person. Don't remember the age, that has a body of a 12-year-old, a body of a person who just reached monarchy. They had just reached monarchy, putting mental maturity to the side and consent to the side. This is a consenting person. They have a body of a 12-year-old that just reached monarchy. Is that immoral for them to give birth?
so this is a very complicated hypothetical that I'm trying to fully grasp here. So in your view, a 12-year-old is what would be like mature as like an 18-year-old?
What I'm saying here is we have a 12-year-old body of a person who is consenting in my hypothetical. Would that be immoral for them to actually give birth?
No, because again, they're just simply not ready physically for that. I mean, just all around. I mean, you're still going through puberty. You should not expect to bear children until you complete puberty.
Why? Physically speaking.
Because again, the mental aspects, the physical aspects, why would you expect
You're bringing mental aspects. I addressed my hypothetical.
But you
My hypothetical
said
is
the body of a 12-year-old. The body of a 12-year-old includes the brain.
yeah, but I know, but I did like clarify that a 12-year-old body for relations. However, we're putting to the side right now whether she can mentally consent or not. That's a dispute me and you have. Sure. Now, assuming I do prove that to you, and I do provide a convincing case for you that she can consent, we have a 12-year-old here that has the body of a 12-year-old that can consent in this hypothetical. Body harm alone, is it immoral for her to have relations and give birth?
Body of a 12-year-old.
Yep. And she's able to give
Okay,
consent.
so then she's like she has the mind of an 18-year-old. Then is what you're saying.
Not even 18, but a mentally mature person that can give consent.
Okay, then it would be an 18-year-old.
Sure, whatever you want to say, that's fine.
Okay, so
someone that has the brain, someone that has the mental capacity to give consent, so you have to have a mental capacity of consenting, according to your view, being an 18-year-old. Sure.
There
But
are
the
there are
body of
genetic
the 12-year-old.
disorders. So I'll give you an example. There's like a girl who's got a genetic disorder where she like she's got like the body of like a 10-year-old,
Sure.
like, or something like that, and yet she's in her 20s.
That's pretty much what I'm giving.
Okay, yeah. Doctors have said someone in that position should not even be having children. So like, doctors say the same thing to like a 12-year-old and a 40-year-old. You shouldn't have children at this point.
But
So like,
I'm asking a moral question. A moral question.
Okay, so can she consent? Again, I will go back to the same thing I said about the 40-year-old. If a doctor says if you have a child, there's a very high likelihood
A
you'll
lot of
die.
the time a doctor won't be saying that. A lot of the time a doctor won't be saying that. It's very exceptional. A 40-year-old most of the time would not have so much risk that a doctor would advise that. That's an exceptional case. A lot of the time they wouldn't be advising that around the ages of 40 to 45. Now, the ages of 40 to 45 has more bodily harm than one who's
Yeah.
just reached the age of menarche being 12 or 13. So now address this. If you're going to be consistent, you're going to have to say to more for a 40 to 45-year-old to give birth. If you're going to say that a 12-year-old in this example
But
is
I
immoral.
already said that. I already said if a 40-year-old goes to a doctor and
Yeah.
says, I want to have a child, and the doctor says, if you have a child, there's a high likelihood you could die. You'll
That's
leave your
exceptional.
husband.
That's exceptional.
What's exceptional?
I showed you the statistics. I didn't show you, but I showed it in my TikTok video where it's 6.5 times more likely for a woman between the ages of 40 to 45 to have a maternal mortality. Now, this maternal mortality is very, very low still. It's still at about 0.2%, 0.25%, I believe. A doctor, generally speaking, will not be advising against a woman giving birth based upon this, or based upon them giving birth to someone that has some genetic complications, such as like Down syndrome. These are very low percentages. You're talking 0 point something, 1% or 2%. These are very low. Just so generally speaking, a lady giving birth, a geriatric pregnancy at these older ages, they have more complications than a younger girl giving or having a pregnancy, which is like around the age of menarche. Now, to my question, a 12-year-old who just reached the age of menarche that is going to give birth, is that immoral for her to do so if she does have the mental capacity to consent?
Okay, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what you're asking here. Okay, so this is why I'm trying to get clarification here. Okay, okay, so you're trying to say about someone? So basically, someone who's got the mind of let's say 18-year-old, but they
Yes.
have the body of a 12-year-old.
Yes.
Okay, can they consent to that kind of stuff? Okay, are you factoring the fact they've been warned that they have a higher risk of death?
They won't be warned with that birth. What's the risk of death? Go ahead. What's the percentage?
So it, what the studies have looked at is like 15 and younger, and so it's going to get progressively worse as they get younger. So what the
Sure.
studies have said is it's 4 times higher, like as I cited.
Sure. And that four times higher is what percentage? It's four times more likely for me to die from a shark than to die from a lightning strike. So what? Give me a percentage.
What do you okay, again, 4 times more likely. So I believe it was like 18.5 out of 10,000 versus like 4 or so,
And
or
what's the
5 or so.
percentage?
Okay. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but this is irrelevant to my point here.
0.0.185%. No doctor is
And
going to
that
be
has a
advised.
lot to do with medical technology because we know that infant and maternal mortality rates were higher in time periods without the
That'll
medical
apply for
technology.
everyone. That'll apply.
Yeah,
That'll heighten the risks for all of them. That doesn't affect anything.
but those percentages are going to, again, they're going to get exponential bigger for the different groups because of the lack of medical technology as well.
Give me a percentage to work with.
For what
If you
specifically?
because the study you gave is a 0.185%.
Okay.
Let's increase that. 0.8%. That's exponentially greater. 1%, 2% even. It's still exponentially greater, but still extremely low.
I, what are you trying to get at here?
Okay, what I'm getting at is we have a higher risk of mortality rates for younger people and older people. Now, sure, the risks today are going to be extremely low at 0.185 or 0.2 or 0.3%, depending on the ages, because of the progress of medical facilities. Now, the problem I'm going to have with is you saying that a 12-year-old giving consent has these major physical harms that could potentially come about when we know that there's a very, very small risk. It's 0 point something percent. But even if I grant you that people back then in the pre-modern world had increased risk, and I give you a 1% probability, I give you a 2% probability or a 3% probability that there's going to be an infant mortality going about, these aren't risks that would justify a doctor to tell someone, hey, you probably shouldn't give birth because of these complications. Give me a percentage that would justify such an advice.
Okay,
What do you
well,
think it
yeah,
should be?
I agree with you, but then again, that's not the reason doctors are so against child marriage. It has a lot more to do with the mental aspects and the raising of the
Okay,
children
again,
and
you're
expecting them and
shifting. No,
things
no,
like that.
I don't want you to shift. I want you to just my hypothetical. My
Okay, but again, your
hypothetical is
hypothetical is
at
missing
12.
the whole point, though.
Okay, is your argument solely the mental harms, or is it mental and physical harms?
It's a compounding thing. Mental is
It's
going
a
to be the
compounding,
main
sure.
issue.
And I'm
Yeah,
trying to show you right now that your physical harms, when we evaluate it alone, it has no bearing. And if you're going to be consistent, you're going to have to condemn geriatric pregnancies. Because
which
if I
again,
if I hypothetically prove to you that a 12-year-old who reaches the age of menarche can consent, the variables that play on risks are going to be lower than a woman giving birth at older ages. 6.5% mortality rate, 4% mortality rate. Sorry, not 6.5. 6.5 times the percentage of mortality for a geriatric pregnancy compared to a four times percentage mortality rate for a younger person. Compared to other complications I can give you where it is heightened. Even
okay,
on the table, yeah.
that's
So
fine,
the point.
but that's not the
So the
point
point
I
is
would ever
we
make.
have a consenting young person, a 12-year-old who reaches the age of menarche. She has less physical risks than a person that's 45. They're both consenting. Is that immoral now for a 12-year-old who is consenting, that has the body of someone who just reached the age of monarchy, based on physical risks alone? Is that enough to say that this is immoral?
Okay, let me just say it back to you so I'm not taken out of context. So if you have someone who's got the brain of an 18-year-old, but the body of a 12-year-old, and they want to try to have a child, okay, it's not necessarily, and I say that very, very cautiously, going to be immoral. But there's all sorts of other compounding factors here. So again, you have to have the mental development. Now, the reason why I think you're bringing this
I'm
up is because I
isolating it.
mentioned the
I'm isolating
study.
it.
Hold
The whole
on,
point is to the whole
hold
point is to
on.
isolate it. The whole
No,
point
that
is to
you
isolate the
can't
physical harm.
isolate. You can't isolate it though, because we're talking about complicated human bodies, and there's always going to be confounding factors. If you remember, the guy I was originally responding to made the ridiculous claim that it's better to give birth from 13 to 14 than
I
it is
disagree.
later in teens, because he said
Yeah,
the bones were elastic. So that's why I was bringing that up in relation to
yeah, I
him.
disagree. I disagree.
What's that?
Yeah, I disagree with him. I disagree with him. The optimal range is
Okay.
between 18 and 25, probably.
Okay.
So,
So I think the context is important because I was responding specifically to what that nonsense he said. I know you're not saying that. When it comes to this issue we're discussing, though, I would never say the physical threat of death is enough for it to be immoral, if that's what you're looking for. It's the confounding factors that I've mentioned throughout this
yeah,
whole
but
stream.
listen. To be fair to me as well, your initial video that I was responding to did not mention mental detriments. Actually, you didn't mention it at all.
Yeah,
What
because
actually
I
happened was
probably,
what actually happened was you brought up the physical detriments as an isolated point. If this is dependent upon mental aspects as well, well, you did yourself a disservice because you did not actually include that within your video. So I'm going to assume that it's a big point, physical harm alone, because you did only provide that in your initial response video. Now, again,
okay, I can
I
understand the
want to direct.
I can understand the misunderstanding, but again, I was responding to his specific claim. So that's why I only brought up the physical aspect.
Okay. Now, I want a proper direct response to what I'm saying. So just to clarify, are you saying that a girl that is 12 years of age with no mental damages, but the body we have, the physical aspect of giving birth, with no mental damages at all, just physical harms, would you consider that to be immoral? I just want a clear
Sorry,
answer.
sorry, say that again. I was checking on something. And by the way, how much time do you have?
As much time as you like.
Okay, I could probably go for another 20 minutes or so. So say the question again.
Sure. So, um, the question is, are you saying that if we just physical harm alone is not sufficient to say that marriages to 12-year-olds that reach the age of monarchy is immoral? Physical harm alone isn't good enough.
No.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, we can continue now.
Okay.
Um, go on. Sorry, I just got like a summary of stuff I wanted to discuss.
Yeah, and I would never. I mean, I've done videos on the aspect of physical harm, and I've said, like, for example, harm is not necessarily evil. Like, so again, there's a whole bunch of other aspects that need to be considered to know whether harm is evil. I've talked about this in my video on suffering, for example.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I have a more comprehensive understanding of what you were trying to
Okay.
say.
I'm
So
okay. So you've asked me a question. Can I now ask you a question?
go ahead.
Okay. So with regards to this whole thing, do you acknowledge that the overwhelming amount of research shows that early teen marriages result in a plethora of problems? Okay. And we know the brain was developing basically the same way as it was 2,000 years ago. Menarche
I
was
agree.
delayed. Girls could enter society in terms of how they were able to participate earlier, but that doesn't mean the brain was not, doesn't mean the brain was developing quicker. Do you acknowledge that these issues are real effects of child marriage?
Yeah, but when we get into what's the causes of these harms, I would dispute those. As you already said, like older marriages do cause for these mental harms to occur, as well as another factor that's at play here is
Whoa. Older marriages can cause some mental issues, but not the amount
not
and
to
the
the extent,
extent of
sure.
what we see with child marriages. Yeah, it's far worse by far.
Yeah, sure. So the determining factors would be a lot. I wouldn't just put it down to uh, their their brain development. I think that's like making it's it's a very nuanced discussion that shouldn't be reduced down to solely brain development. It's social factors as well as other things that are at play that determines whether someone's ready or not. I've already told you that a girl today, if in the West, a 12-year-old who's starting seventh grade, if she was to consummate a marriage, Islamically, that would be immoral on the pretense that she can't give consent. Right now, our dispute is just whether girls in the pre-modern age within these particular contexts were able to give consent or not, depending on social factors, not necessarily on brain development. I showed you there's studies that show how limited brain examination of like neuroscience is on these sort of things. It's not a good.
But in terms of psychology, so psychology is different than neuroscience. So
Yes,
there
that's
was
right.
an umbrella study. Do you know what an umbrella study is?
Yep.
What is an umbrella study?
Go ahead. Like I might be misunderstanding. Just go ahead. You can define
Okay,
it.
so you don't know what so an umbrella study is. Let me tell you what it
It
is.
takes into
It's when
account. From what I know, it takes into account multiple studies and then it draws
No,
conclusions.
it
Okay.
takes into account multiple meta-analyses. So meta-analyses are the ones that take in multiple studies. An umbrella study looked at multiple meta-analyses. And this
Sure.
one called Long-Term Outcomes of Childhood Sexual Abuse. It found, for example, that child sexual abuse was associated with 26 of 28 specific outcomes of psychiatric diagnoses. All studied negative psychosocial outcomes ranging from in all physical health conditions to strongest psychiatric associations with child sexual abuse reported from conversion disorder, borderline personality disorder, depression. The systematic review for two psychiatric outcomes, post-traumatic stress disorder and schizophrenia, and one psychosocial outcome, substance misuse, met with high quality standards. So they know there's a plethora of mental issues that come out of just sexual interaction with children at this point. And just slapping a marriage contract on it doesn't fix that
Sure.
because they're just simply not ready for that kind of stuff. And that
Yeah.
again, that just should because in 500, 1,000 years ago, girls were ready to enter society in terms of what they were required to do in that society. That doesn't mean they're ready for sex because the brain is not developed to where it needs to be. So they can enter into society in terms of helping with household aspects. That's psychosocial, but full mental aspects are going to be the same as they are now.
Yeah. Sure. So, um, another thing to take into account is that Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, did not deal with any of the mental health issues that you actually brought up, right? So it doesn't even apply to the morality of. Even if I was to concede this, hypothetically speaking, if I was to concede this point, it does not apply to what the Prophet ﷺ did. It applies to particular instances where it's being misapplied. Now, the second thing I'm going to say is regarding all of these sort of studies that you pulled up, uh, is the causation of such as psychological disturbances or complications. I would just have to dispute. I wouldn't say it's solely on the grounds of them being young. It would have to be other determining factors. We don't see this abundance of psychological disturbances or complications coming about in the pre-modern age. We see it now, and we have to determine, okay, why is it that we don't see it back then, and they seem equipped back then, but they do see, but they don't seem equipped today. We're gonna have to go into that, right? And we're just gonna disagree on whether they
Well,
work with them or not. But
that's
I
an
personally,
assumption. I mean,
from
like
what I
you didn't
saw,
have psychiatrists who
so
were
what I, yeah,
diagnosing people.
because I don't have my understanding of what's determined as psychosocial maturation or mental maturation or psychological maturation, whatever you want to say, regarding consent. I don't have that determined based upon neuroscience or psychological data. I have that determined based upon whether she's functioning optimally within a society as a functioning adult. The study I gave you shows explicitly that a girl back then can uphold to adulthood responsibilities. Part of that is consenting to certain things, which includes consenting towards relations.
Uh, no, that is an assumption that is not supported by that at all. Again, they're not. They don't even say that they're ready for sexual relations
Does
because
it say
the overall
that they're ready
research
for
showed
adulthood responsibilities?
it's a psychosocial aspect. So it's going to involve the ability to enter society and act in a social way. So again, if you
But
go to a
can they
hunter-gatherer
function as an adult?
society,
Does the study say they can function as an adult?
where does it say they can function as an adult
Sure.
in every single aspect?
Oh, okay, everything else. And I think that's stipulation. So when it
Who-
says
th- Yes, because
social
that's
structure.
the important aspect is
Okay,
sex. That's what we're supposed to be
sure,
talking about if they're ready for
sure.
that. And there's no scientific
So
evidence they will be.
I, I I don't even okay. Listen, the determining factors on when someone is able to consent or not, even if I didn't have any scientific data on this, my determining factor on when I actually grant that someone is mentally mature or not will be based upon their them functioning optimally. I wouldn't have an understanding, or someone in the pre-modern world won't have an understanding of when someone is ready to give consent based upon some neurological data or psychosocial data or psychological data. They made inferences based upon empirical stuff they would see from functioning young adults and when they could see them to be competent. That's so complicated to get into based on ages now, because we can't even put an age number on that. We can't even put an age range because there's going to be exceptions and determining factors for every person that you got to treat on a case-to-case basis. And yeah, even today we can't give proper neurological data as I cited. I think that's the strongest thing to actually determine if you did have concrete neurological data on this. That would be more definitive. But that's just not the case. It's not the same thing as physical harms. Physical harms is much more clear cut.
But we do have all the evidence of psychiatric issues that are arising from this. And so
I'll
those would
dispute
be
the
there.
causes of this. Yeah, I'll just dispute whether I'll dispute the
So
causes of said harms.
you can, but they did adjust it. The study, one of the studies I cited, used adjusted ratios. So it adjusted for compounding factors like poverty and other aspects as well. So it's still coming from child marriage. So they've adjusted for that.
Sure. And do they bring rates? So rates, but even rates of depression or suicide rates or all these things you're going to cite for mental harms. Even the factor of when something is considered to be at a rate that is determined to be immoral is another factor. So how much suicidal rate or how much of a mental harm rate does it have to be for you to say that this is immoral? That's again another thing that needs to get into. But I'm also going to have to compare it with older marriages and the physical and the
Okay.
mental harms that come about from them,
Across,
and how comprehensive they actually are as well. So
okay. In one of
yeah.
the reviews I cited, overlooked and unaddressed, okay, they say a cross-sectional study in Vietnam by Hong Lee et al. Found that even when adjusting for other risk factors, early marriage was associated with an increased risk of intimate partner violence. So that's one of the studies they're reviewing. Girls married before the age of 18 face nearly twice the risk.
Yeah, why
So
why would I care? Okay, give me if the only way that this could be analogous, if you have a Muslim society abiding by Muslim morals, abiding by Muslim practices of marriage, and you give me such a study of young marriages producing all of these mental harms. I would like to see the mental harms and the suicide rates of people in Vietnam, generally speaking, not even just from younger marriages. That'll be interesting to look into as well. There's a
so
lot of different, there's a lot of different variables that have to be taken into account. If we're going to
so
apply this to the Prophet, if we're going to apply this, I'm not saying that younger marriages specifically in every given case will be optimal or be the best situation. There might be a lot of cases where it's not the best situation and the girls won't be ready early on. But that's where the father comes into play, and that's where the situation is assessed on whether it's compatible for such a marriage to be conducted or not. So I'm not making a general statement that every young girl that just reached menarche can go into such marriages. Things have to be assessed, and that's exactly
I
why the Prophet. That's exactly why the Prophet ﷺ, just to cite a hadith and finish up. The Prophet ﷺ mentions in the hadith when Umar and Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with them, approached the Prophet for his daughter's hand in marriage when she was about 12 to 17. When they approached for her hand in marriage, the Prophet said, she's young. Innaha saghira. She's young. So, but later on, Ali, who was younger, and after a time had passed when Fatima did mature a bit more, then the Prophet said, okay, yeah, she can have a marriage with Ali at a later time when they're more compatible. So it's not a one size fits all type of thing about young marriages. There's many things that are taken into account in respect to fathers, assessing the situation for the child, and yeah, that they're making that decision for her based upon benefits and risks.
Yeah, I know that you argue that there are different circumstances for different girls. The problem is when we look even in Muslim societies, we don't see good results coming out of child marriages. So I mean, like, there's no data to support this is going
Are
to
these
happen
practiced
if you just have
in
like some
Muslim
sort of
societies?
yes, because
Where,
like again, the
where,
studies they're looking at are Pakistan. They're looking at Pakistan. They look at Bangladesh. They looked at all sorts of various countries. Turkey was included. Jordan, Iran. They looked at various studies that have been done. And this is just sort of like it makes your claim unfalsifiable because you can just say, well, they're not practicing Islam perfectly there. Okay, maybe, but again, why don't we see it ever practically playing out? Is that this is actually going to result in some sort of okay behavior, let alone any morally good behavior? Why is it always these girls come out messed up in multiple ways? It just seems far better to not go on the ethics of the past and follow what the science is saying and saying, hey, we should let girls wait till they're 18 before we expect any of this kind of stuff on them because this is far better for their mental and physical development.
yeah, sure. So the countries you listed, I'd like to see those studies and compare them to the rate of other non-Muslim societies, and I'd like to look at whether they're practicing Muslims or not. There could be a lot of, I mean,
There's no
specifically,
evidence that practicing
I don't
Muslims are
even
going to
care.
fix these
Yeah,
issues.
I don't even care specifically on aspects of religion or whether they're fasting or not necessarily. What I'm talking here is whether they've conducted the marriage in an Islamic manner. Now, that's what's a dispute here. So that's a very important aspect. Did the father of the girl actually go ahead and assess the situation for the daughter to see if they're compatible or not, or did he just throw his daughter at the first opportunity he had to get her married? These aspects need to be taken into account. If the risks have been assessed by the father, if the social aspects are being addressed, is this girl actually psychosocially mature for such a marriage at such an age? In Pakistan, even there is still a delay in maturity, even though it's a Muslim country, and even though it's not as developed as possibly other countries, there's still that psychosocial mismatch, as I mentioned. So it's not in comparison to these pre-modern young marriages conducted in Islamic societies. Well, now, if you showed me within like the first 50 to 100 years of Islamic society, because that's what we look to as the optimal time where the people were practicing the religion the best. If you show me from that, for example, the Prophet's marriage to Aisha, for example, young marriages conducted by the companions, if you show me any mental harm or psychological harm or any complaints about the reason why they're having these issues is because of because of them being immature mentally, if you can show me that, then sure, I would take that into account. But when you gave me Pakistan, a country doesn't even rule by Islamic law properly, I'm not going to take that into account, especially without proper consideration of what these fathers are doing when they're marrying off their young girls.
Okay, this is just ad hoc rescue. You can just say, well, they're not doing this. As I mentioned, you just make your claim unfalsifiable. As of now, the actual data that we do have doesn't show any benefits of child marriage and it shows excessive harm. So at the end of the day, we got to go on what the actual evidence is, not these random hypotheticals
So,
where we get some
so
alleged perfect
is it
Islamic
being taken?
society.
Is it being taken from societies where child marriage is prominent?
Yes, that's exactly
Okay,
where they're going.
okay, sure. My whole claim isn't that it shouldn't be. My whole claim is that it shouldn't be prominent. It should be done in specific cases where you see your daughter mature enough for said marriage, and you see that there's massive benefit in you marrying off your daughter. I quoted you a
In,
scholar, a classical scholar, Imam Nawawi, where he says that young girls should not be married off unless you see clear
yeah.
benefit.
And here, I understand that's what you're saying, but my argument is we have no evidence any girl would be ready at these young ages. It's just not supported by the data.
Aisha's the evidence right in front of you. Like, there's no mental harm done to her. She was married at 9.
Okay, no psychologist was able to evaluate her. She was done in quite a culture that was going to constantly reinforce this was good. We see the same thing like the psychologist Anna Salter notes, and there's these type of cultures they groom the girls to think it's great, and they just say it's great.
You're not gonna
So you're basically just going on
you're not gonna have
self-reporting
a modern
measures.
you're not gonna have a modern society today when there's this mismatch of them not being able to adapt to general adulthood responsibilities. So why would you expect them to be able to match up with getting married at such a young age? That makes no sense. I
I'm
agree
not
there's a
talking
mismatch.
about adult activities.
I
I'm
agree.
talking about the psychiatric
Yeah,
issues that come from sexual
totally.
interaction.
And
Just saying that Aisha's the exception is like the greatest ad hoc
no,
rescue ever.
I'm not saying she's the exception. I'm telling you she's one example, a clear example that you would know of a young marriage that was done that didn't cause any mental harms. There could be other cases that are being listed.
Allegedly, that's the claim. We don't see any evidence to support it
Sure,
though,
sure,
other
sure.
than she said she was fine. But a lot of the same kids that have been abused say they're fine, and then they go get psychiatric evaluations, and then they're told they have all these
There you
issues.
go.
For
So
example, if you have
yeah,
psychiatric issues you have young, you grow up thinking they're normal because that's how you start developing with them, and then you tell people they're normal, and then no one realizes. So a lot of mental issues go undiagnosed for years. Some people don't ever get diagnosed because they grew up thinking that's just how the normal way they're supposed to
sure,
react and sort of
sure. In the
what
same way you told me that I'm giving you an unfalsifiable assessment, you're giving me the same thing. If I show you young girls getting married that don't cause harm, you're just gonna say that they thought there was no abuse or they thought that there was no mental harm, but there actually was. So yeah,
the
we're trying to
difference
say
is I
yeah,
have studies that show that
we're
there
just at a
is harm
stalemate.
that caused from this. And if you just bring up other reports from the past and say, no,
But the
they weren't
studies
harmed,
can't be
it's
conducted.
inconsistent with it.
But the studies can't be conducted in the pre-modern age where I'm saying there would be no harm. So that's the whole point.
But there's no evidence that there would be a difference, though. So we can look at the way girls
There
react now and we can say, look at all the
is.
harm it's causing.
I gave you a
Likely it's happening in the
psychosocial.
past.
I gave you a psychosocial mismatch. I gave you a, if
Psychosocial is not the same as
yeah,
mental.
if a girl cannot, okay, if there's inhibiting factors that are causing for a girl to not be able to conduct general adulthood responsibilities, I would think that would mean that she's not able to give consent in the same way. So if we did have a society where there is this psychosocial matching between menarche and psychosocial maturity, that would be a study I would be interested in looking at. We don't have that today, so yeah, there's not really something we can do with that.
We
But
have girls today that are in child marriages and we see all this harm. It's likely the same thing that was resulting in the past. For example, we have studies that say that the same thing happens to the boys. When they are abused, all sorts of mental harm results from that. What the Greeks and Romans were doing was probably causing harm, even though no one went around talking about it because they just didn't know any better. And society was basically messed up from numerous reasons that we have fixed in the modern era. So this is not comparable here because I can say, look at all the harm caused in the studies today. Look at how brains are basically the same 2,000 years ago. We should expect the same results, even if it went missed by people who are far more focused on making sure they grew enough food than getting their kids proper psychiatric evaluations.
yeah, I think you said you had to leave, and it's I think you designated it at
Yeah.
whatever the time is for you. When I was 11:30 a.m., I'm guessing that's where you wanted it to end.
Yeah,
So
we've gone for about 2 hours, though. I don't think we're going to reach agreement on this. At the end of the day, I'm going to stand on science and to determine what is going to be
yeah,
ethical, because that's what virtue ethics
I'm
is.
gonna stand. I'm
And
gonna stand with the early church. I'm gonna stand with the early church. You can stand with science.
I mean, the early church would encourage this because this is why we get science out of the Christian world and we don't get stuck with ethics that are, based on very limited scientific data that can help us determine what's ethical.
But yeah, I do appreciate you giving me like this platform to speak with you, and that we can have like this discourse. I think generally like it was very respectful, and I appreciate that we could have this like discourse and give our audiences like both perspectives. And yeah,
Yeah.
I do appreciate the discourse.
Yeah. I'm fine having conversations occasionally on this type of topic because I think this is an important topic and it's important to point out all the damage child marriage does to girls and why it should be abolished worldwide.
Sure, and I agree with you. A girl today is not mentally mature to consent. We're just
That
disputing
is
whether.
that is I appreciate that and I'm glad you're saying that. So I will take that and say yes, you're obviously far better than someone like Daniel Hakikachu.
Uh, I didn't watch what he was saying, but yeah, maybe we have a disagreement on
Oh, you
whether
would
it's
disagree with him for sure. He wants to say that a girl that enters precocious puberty can be married off and consummate the marriage. He admitted that in the debate.
yeah, just to make clear, there's like we have like jurisprudential schools of thought that give a minimum age of marriage. So, for example, in the Hanbali madhab, which is like school jurisprudence, the one I follow, they say the minimum age of marriage is 9. And the reason why they say 9, it's not an exact number to work off of, but rather that's when you would expect a minimum puberty development to the point where she can endure relations. So precocious puberty wouldn't fit that. Although not every, it's not to say, because Ibn Qudama, another scholar in the Hanbali madhab, he goes on to speak about this. It's not to say that every 9-year-old will be ready, but rather what they're looking for is her reaching menarche or her reaching certain secondary sexual characteristics to be able to endure the relations with like pubescent features. So yeah, like the scholars agree. If there's a girl that's like 5 years old or 4 years old and she's precocious, well, because she's precocious, she doesn't have the proper pubescent features developed to endure the relations. So therefore, on the harm principle that we have in Islam, it wouldn't be allowed. And it goes against the natural inclinations, which is like we have the concept known as the fitrah. So we know it's a mental disorder to be attracted to someone that has primarily prepubescent features. A girl that is precocious in puberty, she's going to have primarily prepubescent features. She might have some aspects that are pubescent, but she primarily has prepubescent features, which would make her, if someone's attracted to her, that would go against the natural inclinations of man. And God never legislates like in contradiction to that. So based upon the fitrah as well, it wouldn't be compatible.
Okay, and I understand that. I just will never say a 9-year-old will ever be ready for marriage, let alone
Sure.
consummating marriage. And so,
What about 12-year-old?
no,
Okay.
that's not what the
Okay.
science supports.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. At that point, I'll be using the early church. So yeah.
Okay, you can do that. I'm going to go on what modern experts would
All
say
right.
about
Sounds
it
good. All right.
because we have far more data available for us.
All right. And also, but just before I leave, also, would you be willing to speak to? There was someone I had on my YouTube channel. His name is GGK. He was speaking as like a Muslim reaver. He used to be a Jew. He would like to speak to you on either the Trinity, or whether the Trinity is logical or not, or a conversation on whether the Trinity is in the Old Testament. If you're interested, I'm not sure if you'd be interested in having a
Right
similar
now, I
dialogue.
don't have the time. I have 2 debates I'm preparing for in the fall, plus another one in the winter, and then possibly another one I'm trying to set up right now. So I am swamped as it is. So there's no way I can make time for that.
All right, sounds good. But in future, if you're interested, yeah, yeah, if you want to, you can make contact and we can maybe get that organized.
Okay. All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Goodbye. All right. I'm going to close this out, everybody. I think we're good to go. Let me just make sure everything is. Hold on. Let me do that there. I don't know why comments went away. So I don't see anybody's comments right now. If you're still commenting, it like froze for me, and I'm not sure why. So if you're like, I hit test a while ago to see if any comments were coming, nothing would come in. So unfortunately, I don't see any comments coming in. Not sure why they froze like that. So I'm going to close this out as it is. Thanks.